If you're looking to make sense out of what's going on in the world today, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, Annie, the radio chick Ubelis, and featuring Curtis C.S. Bennett and the most interesting guests that you'll find anywhere on Internet radio. And you can join the show and let your voice be heard by dialing 917-889-3675. So sit back, relax, and remember, Southern Sense is common sense.
Here's the reality. Emergencies usually strike without warning. We're surprised when the stock market crashes or power goes out. Certainly, with earthquakes, there's no warning. These things happen. And when it's breaking news, it's too late to prepare. Now you're scrambling and panicked. Best thing to do is prepare for natural disasters or emergency situations while things are still calm. So ask yourself right now, could you feed yourself or your family for 2 weeks with the food you have at home at this moment? If not, it's time to act and secure an emergency food supply. I use My Patriot Supply, and you should too. A 2-week food kit will get you started. This week, it's on sale for only $75 when you go to my special website, preparewithsouthernsense.com, or call 888-441-7290. These food kits include meals that last up to 25 years in storage. So order now and prepare yourself so there are no surprises. Just call 888-441-7290 or go to preparewithsouthernsense.com. Forget about it. If you can't remember the phone number 888-441-7290 and you can't remember preparewithsouthernsense.com, you know the name of the show. It's Southern Sense. Put a dash in the middle. southern-sense.com. All right, and welcome back to another exciting show here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreakers, YouTube, Facebook. Oh, the heck with it. Just go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, along with my effervescent co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett. Good afternoon, Curtis. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing quite well. Trying to get over a cold, but in the meantime, I'm enjoying the spectacle that the Democrats are running on Trump. I think it'll have the same outcome as all the other things they've tried. It'll be, nothing there.
Well, we are live up on Facebook. I haven't been able to simulcast up on YouTube, but I put the video later on up onto YouTube. So anyone watching on Facebook right now sees another co-host sitting by my shoulder, and that happens to be Baby Puppy. And yes, her name is Puppy. Because she follows me around like a puppy dog. Right. Anyway, we got ourselves so much to talk about. We've got the attempt to impeach Trump going on. They're absolutely rabid over there. But we're going to start off the show with Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch. He'll be joining us at the start of the show. Ryan Lovelace has a new book out called Search and Destroy, the Inside Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh. And just before this impeachment latest kerfuffle hit the fan over his phone conversation to the president of the Ukraine, they were trying to oust Kavanaugh. just a week ago. That's hit the back burner, thankfully. So the Dems have gone absolutely rabid. And then we're going to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Sargis Sangari. I'm going to mess this poor guy's name up. Sargis Sangari, retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel. He'll be joining us. And then we're going to end the show with C.S. Walker talking about what is going on with Biden, the Ukraine, the attempt to impeach Trump, and all that good stuff. So much to talk about, so much to do. And these are my notes for today if you're watching the video. It's a nice little thick stack. Anyway. Want to welcome everyone that's watching over on Facebook. Those that are also listening here in the chat room on Blog Talk Radio, welcome aboard. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them. If you see me swerving my head, that's because I'm checking to see what's going up onto Facebook. That said, Curtis, take a deep breath, Annie. Anyone that watches the show or listens to it knows we start off with a dedication to a fallen hero. And today's dedication is going to go out to police officer Kyle David Olinger of the Montgomery Police Department of Maryland. His end of watch was Thursday, April 18th of 2019. But his original injury dates back to August 13th of 2003. And this is titled Beyond the Darkness by David J. Terrestri, and he writes so wonderfully. Around midnight, August 13th, 2003, Officer Kyle Olinger of the Montgomery County, Maryland Police Department patrolled the central business district of Silver Spring. At the intersection of 2nd Avenue and Spring Street, Olinger noticed a 1993 Chrysler New Yorker parked in a peculiar manner. With his suspicions aroused, Olinger conducted a traffic stop to investigate further. A brief exchange with the man in the driver's seat revealed he had no license, but since he was not actually operating the vehicle, Olinger simply ordered him out of the car and asked him to move on. Still, like any good cop, Olinger took note of the incident and stayed in the back of his mind as the evening wore on. He was skeptical about why a man with no operator's license was sitting in a large sedan parked in the center of town. He was obviously waiting for something or someone. That healthy skepticism, what's often regarded as a police officer's sixth sense, proved right on the mark. Sure enough, Olinger spotted the same car again, only this time it was occupied by a different driver and 3 occupants. At a distance, Olinger watched the Chrysler make an abrupt U-turn and strike a parked car. He immediately activated his overhead lights, pulled over the vehicle, and radioed for backup. Olinger approached the vehicle in a cautious manner, trying his best to remain out of the fatal funnel. He then engaged in conversation with the 3 passengers and ordered the driver out of the vehicle. The traffic stop seemed to be going routinely, yet something was wrong. Olinger knew it. He sensed it. And that's when, out of the corner of his eye, he caught the passenger in the front seat moving about, reaching under his seat. Olinger recognized the threat. He rushed over to the passenger side of the sedan, and there, on the floorboard, he saw a pearl-handled chrome .32 caliber pistol. That's when all hell broke loose. As he had trained for so many times before, Olinger established a tactfully safe position and drew his Beretta. Then he took command of the situation. He ordered everybody in the Chrysler to put their hands up, moving closer. Olinger extended his arm to emphasize his verbal commands. Everyone complied with Olinger's orders except for the front passenger. In one fluid movement, he bent to the floor and retrieved the gun. He was fast. He was also cunning. He grabbed Olinger's extended arm, gaining a tactical advantage and pulling the officer out of position. The 2 men struggled. Then there was a muzzle flash, and a shot rang out. Olinger was struck in the throat just above the protection of his ballistic vest, and for one fleeting moment, the world around him went blank. All Olinger can remember seeing is a black hole surrounded by a hazy ring of light. Time slowed to a crawl. Then Olinger's head crashed against the pavement. He lay there dazed and confused, unable to defend himself as he heard the men get out of the Chrysler. They stood over him, perhaps intending to finish him off. At the very least, they wanted Olinger's Beretta. Unfortunately, Olinger had fallen onto his weapon side, and they couldn't take his service weapon. Passing traffic must have spooked Olinger's attackers because they gave up on trying to take the Beretta. And because he could not move his lower body and his eyes were closed, they wrote him off as dead. They piled back into the Chrysler and raced from the scene. After they left, Olinger was able to open his eyes. He knew he had been shot and he needed help. That help came in the form of a cab driver. He had been passing by after the attack and risked his own safety to come to the aid of the wounded officer. Olinger summoned enough energy to key his lapel microphone while the cabbie broadcast an officer down in need of assistance call and recited the suspect's vehicle tags as a flash lookout to the awaiting units. The officer down call summoned scores of Montgomery County police officers to Olinger's aid. First to arrive on the scene was the department's Bethesda SWAT team. Although he was facilitating between states of awareness and unconsciousness, Olinger managed to provide them with a detailed description of his assailants and how he had been shot. Armed with that information, the Montgomery County officers fanned out in an extensive manhunt, meticulously canvassing the landscape for the would-be cop killers. Perhaps there is no stronger motivation in law enforcement than to bring someone who harms your own to justice. The Olinger manhunt benefited from that emotion. Within a short span, all the suspects, including the shooter, were taken into custody, and the Chrysler was recovered. While the suspects were being apprehended, Olinger was whisked away to the Washington Hospital Center, a specialized trauma facility in Montgomery County. Montgomery County officers, as well as the entire Washington area law enforcement community, flocked to the hospital and set up a continuous vigil. They didn't know whether Olinger was going to live or die. After 9 hours of surgery, doctors told the officers that Olinger was going to live. But they had bad news as well. The risky operation had saved his life, but the surgeon could not extract the .32 slug that jammed against his cervical spine. Olinger was paralyzed from the chest down. He was told he would never walk again. As the weeks turned into months, recovery was replaced by rehabilitation. Olinger was flown to the Craig Hospital in Englewood, Colorado, one of the top brain and spinal cord injury therapy centers in the country. The Montgomery County Police Department paid the entire cost of the 3-month treatment program as part of its ongoing commitment to stand by their officer. Over the next year, adjustment proved to be slow, arduous, and a hard process. Now confined to a wheelchair and without the use of his legs, Olinger painstakingly relearned just about every aspect of his normal life. Simple tasks that had once accomplished in a couple of minutes now took up to half an hour to complete. Such an adjustment is tough enough for one person living alone. But Olinger was a single father. The combination would have proved overwhelming for many people, but not for Olinger. He confronted all of his challenges head-on. 6 months after the shooting, the triggerman faced his day in court. The Rockville courtroom was packed with an array of media, Olinger's family, and his fellow officers from the Montgomery County PD. After deposing of preliminary challenges and laying down the basic legal groundwork, the prosecution swiftly proceeded to the focal point of the case, Ohlinger's testimony. The gallery quieted it as Ohlinger and the Maryland State Attorney, who played the role of the shooter, recreated the events of that night. Their reenactment was aided by the presence of the actual passenger side of the vehicle. It was removed from the car and reassembled in the courtroom to provide the jurors with a vivid visual reminder of the attack. Presented with this compelling testimony and convincing physical evidence, the jury deliberated less than 2 hours before coming back with an attempted first-degree murder conviction and 2 lesser charges. Throughout the entire proceeding, Ohlinger's assailant remained cold and aloof and expressed absolutely no remorse for his crime. But he will have time to think about his crime. The judge handed down a prison term of life, the maximum penalty allowed by the Maryland law. Some people would say that Ohlinger's attacker got what he deserved. He's locked away for life. But looking at the brawny former Marine and dedicated cop who is now locked for life into a wheelchair, it is hard to see the justice. Understandably, the verdict provides little solace for Ohlinger. Gone forever is his ability to remain physically active, and simple activities that once brought joy to his life were taken away by the shooter's decision to attack. Worst of all, he could no longer wrestle and roughhouse with his teenage son or go for long runs to stay in shape. There are things worse than death in this life, he says. For me, it's paralysis. The experts gave Ohlinger a 1 in 99 chance that he'd ever walk again. Not great odds, if you're betting in Vegas. But there was that 1%. And for Ohlinger, that was enough to keep him striving towards that goal. He participated in an intense aquatherapy regimen, and he submitted to acupuncture. He also believed that perhaps some forthcoming medical advance would someday help him regain his mobility. A lot of people would have given up long ago, but Ohlinger kept pushing. He credited his positive mindset to his martial arts training. He was a third-degree black belt with 26 years of experience, and he continued to verbally instruct from a wheelchair at his Aikido studio in Mount Airy, Maryland. He had also returned to work with the Montgomery County PD as a detective with the Special Investigative Division. His new role involved interpreting intelligence and preparing briefs for the department. His new position was a desk job, but Ohlinger still thought like a street cop. He remained a sworn officer, and he still qualified and carried his issued firearm. As he would tell you, once a cop, always a cop. And his paralysis didn't stop him from serving his community and his fellow officers. Ohlinger said that there were many things he could have done differently that night he was shot. When the front seat passenger reached for that weapon in the Chrysler's floorboard that justified the use of deadly force, Ohlinger believed he should have fired and neutralized the imminent threat to his safety. He remembered that he rapidly took into account the assailant's age and the center mass of his target area. But he didn't have a shot. And all he could have done was shoot the man in the back of the head, and that would have given the shooter the appearance of a police-sanctioned execution-style killing. Ohlinger said, that prevalent anti-law enforcement sentiment of jurors throughout the country flashed through his mind as they thought about taking the shot, and he held back in restraint. Unfortunately, it would ultimately cost him his life. Ohlinger serves as a warning for other officers, and he wanted them to learn from his experience. Already, the Ohlinger shooting is being studied at the Montgomery County Police Academy. Ohlinger aspired to return to the academy to tell his story to a new generation of recruits. If I no longer can help people with my physical presence as a street officer, I can help them with my mind. 13 years after being shot, Olinger succumbed to his injuries. Today's show is dedicated to police officer Kyle David Olinger. It is also dedicated to all the brave men and women out there that serve as first responders, be they law enforcement, firefighters, or emergency service. It is also dedicated to all the brave men and women out there that serve in our military from the birth of this nation through today and into its fantastic future. We dedicate to them this song, Amazing Grace. May God bless each and every one.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's grace than when we first begun. We've no less days to sing God's grace than when we'd first begun.
And we're back. You're here listening to Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, SHR Media, the Lone Star Daily News, up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube, Facebook. Oh, the heck with it. Go to the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sense.com. Oh, boy, Curtis. We're going to have our guest calling in about 5 minutes. But I want to welcome everyone that has joined us over in our chat room here on Blog Talk Radio, as well as everyone piling up over on Facebook. Man, I'm getting more people over on Facebook, believe it or not, than I am getting on YouTube. And if anyone's looking for last week's show, I don't know what Facebook did with it. They made it disappear. And I tried to re-upload it.
Oh, man.
And it said processing. And I forgot about it because I've got, you know me, Curtis, I got 4 computers in the house. And I walked away from the computer. I had left the computer on. It's my main frame. I come back a week later. I pull it up, and it's still processing. So I think I'm getting shadow banned on Facebook and certain things. So I'm going to try to see if I can get last week's show back up. But I do know Reddit has banned me in 2 of their categories, believe it or not, for veterans as well as for Christianity. I mean, what show can be more Christian and more pro-veteran than this show? You know?
Hey, you never know with these guys.
Oh, man. You never know. You never, ever know. Hey, listen, while we're waiting for our guest to call in, there was an excellent article that came up earlier this week on the Daily Signal from Marilyn Sinek. And it is an awesome, awesome article. It's titled, "I Was Cursed Out of a Coffee Shop for My Views. Can We All Do Better?" This young lady obviously goes to the same coffee shop every single day and has her coffee and crepe Suzettes or whatever it is she gets. And she's been going to the same shop for, looks like, quite a long time. So everyone knows her there. And she says, I go in, I just mind my own business. I say hi to everyone. I greet everyone, with courtesy. I don't express political views there. I'm just there to get a coffee and a bite for breakfast. And it seems an employee there knows that she works for the Nebraska Family Alliance, which is a pro-life group, which also combats human trafficking and supports the families and also champions First Amendment rights, our First Amendment freedoms. And this employee there, who happens to be transgender, came up to her publicly and cursed her up one side and down the other, telling her to get out. If she were to ever come back in again, she would be refused service. And here she is. She's just getting a cup of coffee and something to eat. She's not pushing her views, and so what? It doesn't matter where you work here. There is a customer. She's not asking that person that's working the counter to support her views. She just wants a cup of coffee, extremely non-political cup of coffee, and a bite to eat.
That's the problem with the left. If you don't agree with them, they will ostracize you. It's almost as if they cannot exist, without just their viewpoint. Anybody that express a different viewpoint, you got to go. We can't have you around. And, that's un-American. I mean, I can't say it any better, Yeah. We should be able to accept other people's views, even if we don't agree with them,
Well, you see,
But not today.
They try to equate it, what this individual did. And by the way, the employee was fired, and the owner of the shop did apologize to Maryland. So I congratulate them on doing that. But it's one thing when you're asked to bake a cake with a political, religious, or social theme on it, where you have a Christian conservative baker who would end up violating their faith-based beliefs, protected by the First Amendment, by creating a cake that supports an LBGT marriage. You had that one baker that had serviced this one guy who happened to have been gay. They knew he was openly gay. He'd been buying for them for 20 years. And when he came in and says, well, I'm getting married, I want you to do the wedding cake. They said, well, we'll be happy to provide you with the materials. We'll make a plain cake. You decorate it yourself or get someone else to decorate for you. But we can't decorate it the way you want because it violates our religious views. That's the person that sued the bakers. For 20 years, they had been friends, and they said, well, we'll do anything else. You're also free to go anywhere else and have it done. You're not going to upset us. See, it works one way, but not the other way. It's a one-way street with them. It's
That's
either
true.
their way or the highway.
And another thing I don't like is after a hard day of working the job and hitting the streets, a police officer goes into a restaurant to get something to eat and is told that they're not welcome, they won't be served, and that's that. And I think that's wrong,
Oh, we see that
Terrible.
We see that time and time again. And a lot of these fast food restaurants, you've got someone that's, a minimum wage employee handling the window or the front counter. And sure, if they get fired from that job, for them, it's easy to go over to another fast food place. But don't expect a recommendation if I'm the owner of that fast food place. And we see it time and time again where law enforcement officers who put their life at risk are being denied service because the person behind the counter is anti-cop. They may be Antifa. They may be Black Lives Matter. But because there's someone there out who wants to serve and protect the public, that individual, no, we're going to deny you service. It's a one-way street. It's either their way or no way. And what this woman went through to be publicly humiliated, is phenomenal. Now, I see callers showing up in our studio. If this is our guest, please press 1 on your keypad because I don't recognize the phone number. Okay, and it is. So let's bring our guest in onto the show, and let's welcome aboard from Jihad Watch, Robert Spencer. Good afternoon, Robert. How are you today? And welcome back to the show.
Just great, thanks. How are you?
Oh, just doing fine.
Hello?
Yeah, we're here. We can hear you. We got you. We got
Good.
you. There's so much.
Excellent.
So much is going on, and when I was putting my notes together last night, I don't even know where to start. You recently, though, came back from a seminar over in Israel where you talked about a host of different topics. And when you think about radical Islam and the Islam militant movements, you know, it has spread into so many different avenues of security and our daily lives that most people aren't even aware of it. You know, and as I was looking at
Yeah, that's certainly true.
it's surprising.
Yeah, it's. I think people are used to the idea of it now. After 9/11 was a big shock, but nowadays it's as if the statement of the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is himself a Muslim, who said very famously that terrorism is just something that is part and parcel of living in a great city. I think people really do take that kind of thing for granted, and so if there's a certain number of jihad terror attacks in the United States, then they don't mind. And at the same time, the jihad groups have adopted a different strategy, and they think that it is not wise for them to mount large-scale terror attacks like 9/11 because they draw too much attention. But they're slowly, they're very well embedded within the political and media establishments, and they're biding their time and infiltrating in various ways, and it's all working out great for them.
Well, they have different groups such as CARE and other affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood that have infiltrated our society on so many, many different levels. A couple of years back, my sweet NYPD had to remove from the patrol guide any reference to Muslim terrorists. They had to take a whole section out because they've infiltrated. How dare you even suggest that a terrorist may be of the Muslim faith?
Yes. The Obama administration did that across the board. The counter-terror strategy of the Obama administration was called countering violent extremism. It very carefully, if you can still read the countering violent extremism material online, and you can see that it never mentions Islam or jihad in connection with terrorism. The whole exercise was to separate Islam from terrorism, which unfortunately it's great for Obama to do it, but the terrorists are not doing it.
Well, you know, you wrote a really great article for PJ Media earlier this week, and it was titled Trump Administration to UNC and Duke, Quit Promoting Islam on Our Dime. We see it in our public schools where the world history promotes Islam, even teaching the Shahada so far. It's in our universities and colleges. We have a whole generations being indoctrinated that Islam is good, Judaism and Christianity is bad. They're bigots. We got everyone being brainwashed on all ends.
This is certainly true, yeah, absolutely. The response after 9/11 on the part of George W. Bush and many others was to try to make sure that Muslims in the United States didn't feel unnecessarily singled out, and that's fine as well. But the problem is that if you're dealing with terrorists who are Muslims, then you have to go into mosques. You have to investigate Muslims to some degree. And if you allow Islamic groups like CARE, which is tied to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, to claim that any such action is hateful and bigoted and racist, then you're allowing them to control the counterterror response and effectively to stymie that counterterror response. And this is what we've seen all over the place, and especially in colleges and universities, that what you have is a concerted effort to make sure that Muslims don't feel victimized or demonized or marginalized. And what it turns out to be is that they have a kind of deference, and Islam is treated with a respect that, as you note, it is never accorded to Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah, it's funny because when I used to ride into my command in Brooklyn, I would go past the mosque that was off of Cypress Avenue, and I always wondered why there was armed guards outside the mosque. And then in 1993, the World Trade Center was attacked the first time. Now, they already had armed guards. And as we fast forward through time, we see that they've now put together in Brooklyn their own patrol, mimicking the uniforms of NYPD, mimicking the vehicles of NYPD, and yet they use the excuse, well, the Hasidims have the Shamrim patrol, and we have other ethnicities that have their patrol, so we need to protect and educate the public with our patrol. But on the Shillman patrol, I never saw them mimic our uniforms or our vehicles. Any other civilian patrol, never saw them mimic our vehicles or our uniforms.
Yes, that's right. This is a determinedly deceptive effort that is something that you don't see in the Jewish Defense Group and the others. And it's patently dishonest and cynical for them to claim that they're exactly the same thing. It's really remarkable when you see the Muslim patrol cars. It looks like you're being stopped by the police. And yet all of this is supposedly an initiative to try to protect Muslims from being victimized, but Muslims are not being victimized. There's an epidemic nowadays in New York City of Jews being attacked on the street, Nazi swastikas being painted all over the place. It's really very disturbing, but there's absolutely nothing like that happening with the Islamic community. And yet the thing is that in our society today, victimhood is a very big deal. It's a big business. And if they can portray themselves as victims, they can deflect attention from jihad terror activity and gain special favors and accommodations. And so we even have many Muslims faking hate crimes. There was a notorious incident on the New York City subway a couple of years ago. A girl said that her hijab was pulled off by MAGA hat-wearing Trump fanatics and so on. It was all made up. There are many other such stories. Because they don't have any actual anti-Muslim incidents, so they make them up, these Islamic supremacist groups, and then they use them to try to gain political points.
Well, I think you said something important, though. You said something very, very important because you're right. It is big business. If we cut off the money that it helps encourage acts like this, if we cut off the media attention, that business will shrink, wouldn't it?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that every time, really every time, with no exaggeration, that there's a story involving Muslims, you get a quote in the mainstream media from the Council on American Islamic Relations. And they constantly call it a Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization without ever mentioning that it was the Justice Department that said it had ties to Hamas and that it's opposed to every counterterror measure that's ever been proposed or implemented. And so it's not really a trustworthy source and certainly not a voice for civil rights, but it's accorded this respect in the mainstream. And so it has a disproportionate influence in the public debate.
Well, my co-host Curtis is with us, so go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it the Obama administration that told law enforcement that mosques were off limit? And if that is correct, does he have the authority to dictate that kind of policy?
Yeah, as far as I know, there was nothing illegal about that. I could be wrong. I'm no lawyer, but I don't think that there is anything that forbids the president from saying that he wants the resources of federal law enforcement or counterterror intelligence investigations and so on to divert their activities to investigating one thing instead of another. And I think that that's perfectly within his rights. It was drastically wrong, of course. It's something that's inexcusably wrong-headed, but I don't know that it's illegal.
No, we don't know about that at all. You talked about victimization, and you've got the squad out there. I had a laugh because, I think I've told you that I was on duty that day in '93 when the Trade Center was hit the first time. It was the end of February of '93. And we had where they were claiming now that CARE was born out of 9/11. No, CARE rose up from the ashes of the '93 bombing. It was their way of protecting the Muslim community and excusing the bombers in there, saying, it was radical, it's not mainstream, it's not everyone else in the world. Muslims really don't want to kill Christians and Jews. CARE came out of the '93 bombing. And we hear disinformation, we hear constantly, if you criticize anyone, someone especially like Ilhan Omar, how dare the president call her out in public in something? No, you've got to ban the First Amendment. You have to protect Islam at any cost.
Yeah, CARE, as a matter of fact, has called on Twitter to ban the president because he criticized Ilhan Omar. And I think it's really astonishing that this sort of thing is taken seriously by anyone. But yeah, CARE was founded in 1994, not after 2001, as Ilhan Omar herself actually claimed. In '94, it was founded by Nihad Awad and Omar Ahmed of the Islamic Association for Palestine, which was a Hamas front. And it was designed to advance the Hamas agenda in the United States. Of course, it's expanded way beyond that and is obstructing counterterror efforts, defaming and destroying the careers of those who stand up and speak honestly about the nature and magnitude of the jihad threat and so on. So quite a few other things that it has ended up doing.
Now, I found an article, I put it aside somewhere, I can't find it right at the moment, but I found it interesting that Facebook has algorithms on it that allow radical Islam to seek out converts to it and get recruits. They'll use those same algorithms to ban someone like you or me, but they won't ban the recruiting of radicals.
Yeah, it's really a disgrace. It's very strange. There are Al Qaeda and ISIS recruitment materials on Facebook. Nobody does anything about it. Facebook doesn't seem to care. Meanwhile, they act with very great speed against foes of jihad terror, and many have been banned. I'm shadow banned, such that I don't really have any significant readership on Facebook. It dropped in the middle of 2017. Early in 2017, rather. Just one day, suddenly, I was getting 2,000 referrals a day from Facebook. It dropped one day by 90% to 200 a day, and has never recovered. This is the effects of a concerted effort to silence voices that dissent from the far-left agenda. It's not really about Islam in this case primarily, although because the Democrats and the left are sold out to the Islamic agenda, the foes of jihad terror and Sharia oppression get caught up in this. But what it's about for them is to try to prevent the 2016 election from happening again. And they want to keep that, they want to make sure that they elect Democrats in 2020 and destroy Trump. And so they don't want to allow voices that might support Trump or lead people to vote for him to be heard.
Well, 2020 election is very, very important, and I'm glad you brought that up. Just so listeners know, we're speaking with Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch. You can find him at jihadwatch.org. And you've got a new book coming out in December called The Palestine Delusion, The Catastrophic History of the Middle East Peace Process. But there is a group out there that wants to put 5,000 Muslims on the next election ballot to run nationwide. Should we be frightened?
Yeah, this is a concerted effort. It started in 2016. There were 80 Muslims running for various offices around the country, and they are certainly going to be running more in 2020. Now, of course, it depends on the Muslim whether this is a matter of great concern. But unfortunately, many of these candidates are backed by far left groups and groups like the Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations, to the degree that it ends up being something that vastly expands their voice and influence, as we've seen with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib in Congress, that this confers upon their far left views a certain legitimization.
Yeah, going through your website, I found so many fantastic articles. And yeah, I do get your newsletter in my mailbox. I've been getting it for years. I encourage other people to get it too. And I just found the article on the algorithm. Gee, Annie, we're really up to date here now. We have the, let me get the article here. The Ayatollah Khomeini has put out I don't know what you call it, an edict or a fatwa, saying that women were to wear the hijab if they're to be spared depraved behavior. There's a push worldwide for women to accept wearing the hijab, in so much now that in Australia next month, in just a matter of a couple of days, they're coming out with a TV series, a comedy TV series about a woman in a hijab called The Halal Girls, Gurls. Women are subservient. They are second-class citizens. They only inherit half of what a man does. It takes three people, I'm getting this bass backwards, 3 women to equal 1 man in testimony or anything else. So why would women accept this?
Yeah, it's two women for 1 man in testimony. But in any case, the Islamic law certainly does mandate discrimination against women, mandates that women can be beaten if the man fears disobedience from them. I mean, they don't even have to be disobedient. He just has to fear disobedience. And this is compounded by the tendency of Western feminists to see the hijab and everything that goes with it as some wonderful expression of multiculturalism that they have nothing to say about. And this is what's really appalling about this, that instead of standing up for the rights of women in Muslim countries, they are abandoned to their fate by these women who think that they are being culturally sensitive by doing so. And so you have women who've been sentenced to 10 years in prison, women who've been brutalized, tortured, even killed for not wearing the hijab. And in the West, you have feminists wearing the hijab in solidarity with the hijab-wearing women who are supposedly oppressed by wicked Trump supporters in the United States. That's a lot of hogwash, but it has a lot of traction in the establishment media.
Yeah, it's amazing, though, because they're coming out with this halal girls to promote. And I'm wondering how many young girls will watch this TV show and say, hey, maybe I'll just abandon my Christian or Jewish faith and convert to Islam. Isn't that the main purpose now, to gain more converts by going after the youth?
It's not necessarily directly the plan to gain converts, but there's no doubt that this TV show that will present, no doubt, a whitewashed and rosy version of Islam, when compared with the relentlessly negative depictions of Christianity and Judaism in the establishment media, will make many people convert. I think the idea behind the non-Muslim television executives and so on who've passed on this is that they have bought into the nonsense that Muslims are some sort of victimized, oppressed class in the United States, and that they need to redress that by showing that Muslims are normal folk just like everybody else. And so they present this rosy, whitewashed vision in this TV series, and it will end up with people converting to Islam. And some of them, unfortunately, will become jihad terrorists. I track this all the time at my website, Jihad Watch. There's a steady stream of converts to Islam who turn to jihad violence and join terror groups. And this is something that nobody seems to be interested in among law enforcement or counterterror officials, which I think is very curious. You never see converts to Christianity or other religions becoming violent. And it's strange to me that there's absolutely no interest among authorities in the fact that this just keeps happening over and over again, that converts to Islam become violent. And it's testimony, of course, to the power of the victimhood propaganda that is so prevalent and has made for these TV series in the first place.
Well, you mentioned the violent attacks because you have an article up on your website, jihadwatch.org, that the BBC only reported 3 out of 149 jihad terror attacks. And here you're bombarded daily with the media talking about mass shootings here in the United States, but they completely ignore the massive executions, beheadings, rapes that go on in areas that have become heavily Muslim, such as in France, where one guy in France drove into the crowd screaming Allahu Akbar, taking out people. You have massive rapes and other assaults attacking in Muslim heavy, dense areas in Germany and in England. The media will not talk about them, but Americans are crazy because of these mass shootings.
Yeah, here again, it's because of this propaganda about Muslims being victims. And this has been so effective that even news media sources think that they'll be hurting innocent people or allowing for white supremacists or racists or whatever they're calling people today to benefit if they report on the activities of jihad terrorists. Recently at Jihad Watch, I had a story about a family in Germany, and their daughter was raped and killed by a Muslim migrant. And their first concern was that they were hoping right-wing extremists would not exploit the killing of their daughter. And I think, okay, so in other words, they want to shame people into not speaking about the root causes of what happened and not speak about the teachings of Islam that allow for the seizure of infidel women and their sexual assault. These things are actually in the Quran, and yet this family has been so brainwashed by the multicultural propaganda that pervades everything, that their daughter has been killed, and the first thing they think about is, oh, we can't let the right wing use this.
You know, you mentioned the Quran, and I keep on flashing back to when I went head-to-head with this one imam who said the Quran will never replace the U.S. Constitution, and I waved my Quran in his face and says, that's not what it says in this book. He wasn't too happy with me, having read the Quran.
But that's absolutely true.
But that's what we have to do. We have
no
to
doubt
challenge.
About that.
We need to have a voice to challenge, and we're being shamed into silence.
Yes. Well, that's a very concerted effort. Remember, Hillary Clinton said to do that. She recommended that. She said that she actually was speaking. People have forgotten this, but this was back in 2010 or 11, and she was Secretary of State, and she went to Istanbul to speak at the conference of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which for years has been trying to get the member states of the UN to criminalize criticism of Islam. And she said, we can't do that directly because we have the First Amendment, but we can use good old-fashioned techniques of peer pressure and shaming to get people to stop saying what we don't like. And so I think that's worked wonderfully for them, that most people are afraid of saying anything critical of Islam because they know they'll be shamed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what percentage in Congress, say, for instance, Muslims would warrant a change in structure in our republic? In other words, how many Muslims you think, percentage-wise, would it take in Congress to start changing our republic into Islamic, type society?
Well,
because they're getting into office. They are getting into office. They're running at the state, local, federal level.
I don't think it would have to be many at all because the left is so eager to accommodate them, eager to do the bidding. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, are setting the agenda for the Democratic Party now. Remember that Nancy Pelosi was against impeachment proceedings because they don't have any reason to impeach the president. He hasn't done anything wrong. But now they're going for it because Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib want it, and their ally Ocasio-Cortez. And so it's I don't think that there would have to be very many at all, 10% or fewer, for the Islamic agenda to start to be enacted in this country. Wow. It would just be because the left is so pliant and willing to go along.
Well, we've already had it in our society. On 9/11, a Christian church was barred and it canceled their 9/11 memorial service because the Muslim community up there, CARE stepped in and got it canceled. We see this nonstop. We see, like I said, the invasion into our public schools, our universities, our colleges, into our local, state and federal government. We have right now, Captain Morgan had a thing on their website. When you went onto there, you had to tell them whether or not you were a Muslim or not. Can you believe Captain Morgan?
Yes.
This is crazy.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
We've allowed it to seep into our society.
Yes, that's right. And people have not been realizing what has been going on because it's been couched very skillfully in the guise of working against discrimination and hatred and so on. And of course, nobody wants to really be a racist or to discriminate against anybody. And so it worked beautifully.
Yeah, well, fortunately, enough people got on the Captain Morgan website and complained, and they have since taken it down. But they're in our corporate structure, and you see the influence constantly, and most of us ignore it day by day, but we have to start paying attention. If we don't, our nation will forever be changed. And
yes.
Will we ever recover? I don't think so, because look at what's happened already in England, Germany, France, and several other countries. You've got Aragon that wants Sharia worldwide. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
You've got a Dearborn imam saying that Trump is responsible for the jihad attacks in the oil fields. Trump's fault.
Yes. Yes, indeed. It's really nuts, but the thing is the left just puts this stuff out as if it were axiomatic.
And if we don't pay attention, we're on a one-way road and we're going downhill from there. Your book is coming out in December, The Palestinian Delusion, where you talk about the Palestinian quote, peace process, where there really is no real true peace process because there was never really a true Palestine. How can we have a peace process for something that never existed?
And so that's quite right. The left says that the Israelis are on stolen land and that it's usurping the Palestinian land and so on. There was never a Palestinian state. And there's no Palestinian nationality that's distinct from that of the Arabs of the area. The Palestinians, as I show in the book, were invented in order to be a public relations tool to beat Israel with, because the Israelis were being seen as the courageous underdog facing massive Arab states around them. And so now that's all turned around, and you have the tiny Palestinian people facing the massive Israeli war machine. The book goes through the history of all the attempts to make peace, shows why they never work, and explains why they will never work, and why we need a massive rethinking of this entire situation.
Well, Robert, it has been a pleasure having you on. As soon as that book comes out, you got to get me a copy, and we'll have you back on, and we'll talk about that. It is a subject that we really have to pay attention to, because if Israel falls, there goes the rest of the world. They say, well, if America falls, America doesn't pay attention to Israel, will fall too.
Yes.
Well,
indeed so. So thank you very much. I'll certainly make sure to get you one.
God bless you for the hard work you do, sir. And oh, by the way, have a blessed Rosh Hashanah. I mispronounced that. Rosh Hashanah.
Thank you very much.
All right, Robert Spencer. Check out his website, jihadwatch.org.
Take care.
And we've got our next victim up in the battle box. I just put the wrong person. I just clicked on the wrong button. I'll get this right, Curtis. I'll get this right. First time onto the show, Ryan Lovelace. Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I loved your book, which is called Search and Destroy, Inside the Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh. And prior to having Robert Spencer on, Curtis and I were talking that how amazing it is they got the impeachment threat going up right now in the House. But just days prior, they were attempting to take Brett Kavanaugh down once again with a false New York Times article. And these are all things that you addressed in your book, how they just tried to rework it, phrased a little bit differently, but once again tried to take out Brett Kavanaugh.
That's right. And, they're still trying to. Even today, we've seen Senator Kamala Harris on the campaign trail call for a formal impeachment inquiry now into Brett Kavanaugh. And I really think all of this is part of what the left has said in its own admission is part of an effort to undermine and attack the legitimacy and authority of the Supreme Court. With Justice Kavanaugh, what the left has said, and particularly Deborah Katz, who is Christine Blasey Ford's attorney, Christine Blasey Ford being the primary accuser of Kavanaugh, what they've said is they want to put an asterisk next to the name of Brett Kavanaugh, a Me Too asterisk, so that folks won't listen to him. And then with Justice Gorsuch, President Trump's first pick for the Supreme Court, the left has said he sits in a stolen seat that belongs to Merrick Garland, President Obama's pick. And with each of those things, we see part of the larger push on behalf of the left to undermine the justices that President Trump has picked, which is all wrapped up in the effort to expand the Supreme Court too in the 2020 election and try to grow it to dilute the justices that are appointed by Republican presidents.
Well, didn't FDR attempt to do that too by appointing more than 9, and that didn't work out too well?
There have been court-packing attempts in the past, and they haven't worked out as well. And from the left in particular, we haven't seen this kind of coordinated and organized push before. And one of the real big reasons why is because of this new dark money group called Demand Justice. Demand Justice formed last year just before Justice Kennedy retired, which produced a vacancy that Justice Kavanaugh has filled. And they pledged to spend $5 million opposing whomever President Trump would have selected, which ended up being Justice Kavanaugh. But they're the ones that are responsible for the push on the left to grow the court. They're whipping the 2020 Democratic candidates to fall in line on their far left agenda to grow the court. And they've even gone so far as to spend tens of thousands of dollars against one candidate in particular, Michael Bennett in New Hampshire, who was polling at 0%. But they spent the money because they didn't think he was sufficiently to the left, because he had actually supported a couple of Trump's picks for the lower courts. And that's really remarkable because it's something we just haven't seen before.
It's funny because as I was reading your book, I didn't pay much attention to Kavanaugh's rulings or anything else. I'm someone that's an originalist. I'm more in line with Clarence Thomas. And he's not an originalist. He believes in precedent, even if that precedent is unconstitutional or blatantly wrong. So you wonder why they were against him so hard, except for the fact he was recommended by Trump.
And that is a really important question. And I think it's something that we watched unfold in really interesting ways throughout his nomination. When he was first nominated, conservatives did have concerns that he wasn't quite so willing to be an originalist and textualist in the mold of Justice Scalia. And there were concerns about that Senator Susan Collins, who voted in support of him and was a crucial vote, seemed to echo when she was saying in her discussions with him, she understood what he was telling her to mean, that it was going to take more than the current 5 justices who were appointed by Republican presidents to overturn a longstanding precedent like Roe versus Wade with the right to obtain an abortion. But I think what we really saw was, in the left's own words, an attempt to go after then Judge Kavanaugh because of Roe versus Wade. Deborah Katz, who was Christine Blasey Ford's attorney, said that her client, Christine Blasey Ford, was motivated in part by Roe versus Wade and the harm that she expected Kavanaugh to do to the right to obtain an abortion in the United States if he was confirmed. And I think we really saw the politics of abortion play out at the federal level with regard to the judiciary in a way we've never seen before, but we're only going to continue to see going forward. And it's something that's grown for years, dating back to Justice Thomas's hearings and all the way through till today.
Well, we got a caller in on the line. Let me bring him along because he's a former co-host of mine. So every once in a while he pops in. Cool, Mike, go ahead. You're on the line with Ryan Lovelace, the author of Search and Destroy.
Ryan, hello. Hi, Annie and Mr. Bennett. Thank you for your service as always. My question, it seems like oftentimes Republicans, being the spineless backbone sissies that they are, cave to a lot of liberalism. My point, I guess here's my question. You seem to have a very good grasp of this, much greater than I do, I can tell you. I oftentimes think Democrats just onslaught with their attacks. Could it possibly be they want to manipulate maybe Gorsuch or Kavanaugh into voting with them? Because Republicans seem to want to be accepted. George W. Bush, probably the worst president in my lifetime, was the most spineless sissy in the world. He peed his pants every time, a Democrat said anything bad about him, and then he raised taxes to make it all good. I guess my question here is, do you think this onslaught is maybe to twist and turn some decisions, maybe not ones that have already been made, obviously, but ones down the road as kind of in order to convince some of these people to do this so they'll be liked better, or to appease the liberals?
I think so. I think even by their own words, they tell us that. We've seen Senate Democrats for the first time. They wrote to the Supreme Court in a Second Amendment case asking the court to rule in a particular way to meet a political outcome that they wanted to do. Typically we don't see the legislative branch ask the judicial branch to reach a particular ruling. They would write a law if they want to accomplish a outcome for their constituents. It's pretty unprecedented. It's something we haven't seen before. And I think the justices are aware of that too. I had the opportunity to speak with Justice Gorsuch last month now, and one of the things that he told me was about his rules for his law clerks, and there are mainly two of them. And the first one is when people ask you, the public, that want you to come along with them to make something up that isn't in the Constitution, don't do it, don't make something up. And when people put pressure on you to do that, and they'll tell you they won't invite you to their cocktail parties and other things in Washington that are, different places of prominence in that, refer back to the first rule and still don't make stuff up. So I think these justices are cognizant of the ways in which the left attempts to push and pressure them into ruling in a certain way. And I think that's certainly behind all these political attacks on the court. Whether or not the justices hold up over time is something that remains to be seen, because we have seen in the past other justices seem to bend back towards different political pressures at various points in history.
Well,
we saw that with the Affordable Health Care Act.
That we did.
Go ahead, Annie.
I just want people to know that, Ryan, you have a unique perspective because you are the Supreme Court reporter for the Washington Examiner. So you do get the inside look at what is going on in the court in a very, very unique way. And a matter of fact, I had to crack up because you mentioned in your book Shoshana Weissman. And I kept on looking at my Twitter feed over the last couple of months going, why do I know this name? Because she follows me, believe it or not. And as I hit that part of the book where you mention her in there, I had to send her out a little message saying, hey, I'm reading about you in the book. I didn't know you followed me. So I realized who she was. But what she did, she was the forefront of a new movement that social networks is allowing us to do, allowing us to counter these efforts from the left. You want to explain that?
That's right. Sure, absolutely. I think that was one of the things that was so different about Justice Kavanaugh's nomination and the controversy from previous ones, is that social media was really in many ways weaponized against him. The way these allegations traded up the chain last year, they moved from a blog called The Intercept, where it just was an allegation alleging an incident and was purposely vague, didn't say anything about sexual misconduct, through Senator Feinstein's office, who confirmed it, and then the national press never bothered looking into it, the truth or falsity of all these allegations, so they spread on social media. But on the right side of things, people like Shoshana Weissman over at the R Street Institute were able to, in real time, push back against some of these crazy allegations, some of the antics at the actual hearings on Justice Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, by acting in a way to kind of do a rapid response operation on Twitter and other social media to say, actually, that thing that they just said on television isn't true, and here's why. And in that way, this really unfolded and was fought more like a presidential campaign battle than a Supreme Court nomination. Much of this was turning towards presidential politics. And I really think when we look back now, what we kind of see when we see some of the Republicans caught flat-footed in a way that they, that Democrats aren't so much when they fight these battles down in the trenches, I think we're beginning to see a shift in people recognizing that these kinds of battles about the courts are going to get more and more political.
Well, what I found...
Ryan, I got a question for you.
All right, go ahead, Curtis.
Yeah, I want to mention something that Cool Mike said, started to say, and my question is this. What were your thoughts when Chief Justice Roberts sided with, Obamacare, and do you believe he was blackmailed?
Well, I don't know that he was blackmailed. I don't have any evidence to suggest that or reason necessarily to think that. When I saw it, the really frustrating thing to me as a reporter was all of the incorrect reporting that immediately happened. So many folks in my profession rushed outside the court, and they were reading the opinions in their hand while they were trying to broadcast on air about what it actually said. And they didn't finish reading it before they told the public that Obamacare hadn't survived. And so many people were left with the impression that it had been struck down. And I think that really is part of the problem here, is because so many of us that cover the court failed to do the full due diligence in so many of these stories that people are often led with the wrong impressions. And I wonder whether or not it affects the justices and how they go about doing their work. There's been some real interesting work here in Washington lately about whether or not the press and kind of the new media on the internet has affected the way the Supreme Court justices do their job. So for me personally, I think it's one of those things that, I kind of looked at from that angle as to how can we do what we do in the press better so that it doesn't affect things in a harmful or negative way. But in terms of why and how Chief Justice Roberts reached that ruling, I think it's certainly something that's befuddled even many of his allies and many of those that aren't even originalists or textualists, but just concerned with the politics of things. And I think he was looking at the politics of things there from what all of them are saying, too.
Well, I was amazed at how organized the resistance was without even knowing who the nominee was, because you've got, I'm going to ask you about Brian Fallon and Ryan Holiday, and why they were so instrumental in the resistance.
Well, with Brian Fallon, he was Hillary Clinton's former campaign flack. He was also a former aide to now Minority Leader Senator Schumer from New York and former Attorney General Eric Holder. So he understands the judicial nominations battle from every angle, from the campaign angle, from the Senate, and from the Justice Department. And he is the new leader of this Demand Justice group, the group that spent $5 million, pledged to spend $5 million before anyone was picked to fight against them. And he's the one now that's really whipping things in 2020 on the left to expand the courts, and he's really the vocal voice and face of that movement to change the way the Supreme Court looks and how it's stocked. And with Ryan Holiday, he's really someone that identified this trading up the chain process by which nonsense becomes nightly news. And he's the one, I think, who has this framework by which we can understand, and I've learned precisely how these allegations went from being things that the Washington Post ignored to things they boomed out there as veritable fact. Christine Blasey Ford first approached the Washington Post in July, and they ignored her. Her encrypted messages to the Post I published in full in the back of Search and Destroy so folks can read through them in full context and not have to take spliced quotes out of it. But when she first approached them, they weren't interested. And she said, no, I've been advised to go to the New York Times or Senators. And she later said that she was advised by beach friends who we still don't know who that is. But at the time, the Post ignored her. It was only after these allegations traded up the chain, just in the same way that Ryan Holiday had done with all kinds of different nonsense over the years for different marketing campaigns for corporate clients and big businesses and other political actors, that she was then able to grab attention, get into a hearing room on national television, and avoid having to face any adversarial questions ever at all.
Well, it's. I have down here that with Ryan Halliday, he got this down to a science. Media manipulation involves 3 levels: the entry point, the legacy media, and then the national press. He has got it in such a way as that you put the inkling and the idea out there in the right ear at the right time, and it just goes up the food chain. And you end up with someone like the New York Post or the Washington Post, the New York Times, that will then blaze it as absolute God-given truth. And we just saw it recently with that false article in the New York Times. And heaven forbid people forget that the New York Times also denied that the Holocaust was occurring as people were being killed in the concentration camps. No. You can't look at the truth. You have to post everything else.
And I think what it also all speaks to is a pattern of a lack of disclosure on behalf of the Times. With that latest story, the newest allegations, and I'm frankly even reluctant to call them allegations because they're rumors. In this case, the rumor was that there was another accuser and there was another victim of sexual misconduct by Brett Kavanaugh, but it turns out no one's really making the accusation. It's one person who said they think they heard something, and the alleged victim says to her friends reportedly that she doesn't even think this happened. She's been failing to confirm it for a whole year. But none of that was in the Times' original story. And also what wasn't in the Times' original story that was excerpted from a book was that the authors of the book and the reporters of the Times have a personal connection to the story. They went to school with Brett Kavanaugh. One author in particular, Robin Pogrebin, was a classmate of Brett Kavanaugh's at Yale as an undergraduate at the same time as he was. And I think that's one of the most important things about doing this kind of work to investigate sexual misconduct claims is to remove yourself from the story. But instead what they did was they inserted themselves into it, and it's something that I think the Times didn't do in advance of publication, was the kind of due diligence to make sure that this wasn't a personal vendetta being carried out against a former classmate, but an actual work of journalism. And I think it's part of the problem of how we ended up here and helps to explain the way things traded up the chain, just as you were describing.
Well,
can I ask a question to Ryan, Annie?
Go ahead, Mike.
When we're talking, the exact topic we're talking about, I forget who it was. We had a guest on, and I was co-hosting for you, Annie, but I was filling in for Curtis. He was doing the book tour. Why is it Republican? Where's the Republican groups that just pour money into this and attack these people? And there's so much like this Greta, the new poster child. She's out there bashing every country but China, of course, and we all know why. But my point is, where's the $5 million to fight these other groups and to tear them down from the other side? It just seems like so many Republicans are part of the deep state, and it just seems like they have no backbone whatsoever. Antifa's attacking people, and nobody attacks back. I mean, why? What is wrong with? People like us will stand up for what we believe in. Where are the other ones? They're all worried about, you mentioned the cocktail parties, where are our people?
It's a good question. And, for the longest time, the group on the right that had kind of been responsible for trying to organize around the courts was the Judicial Crisis Network. And they had existed since the Bush days and had seen some of the ways in which, in the aftermath of the Clinton years, Republicans were having problems trying to get some of these judges through. But there's lately been a new group that's formed called the Article 3 Project that was formed by the counsel for Senator Grassley, who is the chairman of the committee that vetted Justice Kavanaugh, and they've just formed. They're brand new, and they're kind of still growing in terms of funding, but their main project is going to be just what you're describing, pushing back against the left, fighting all of these Supreme Court nominees and President Trump at every turn, and they're going to kind of, in their own words, take the gloves off because they don't think anyone else is. So it seems like there's some changes there where there could actually be some new groups that are going to attempt to do this for the first time, but in the past, we just haven't seen it.
Because we saw that leaked letter. If President would have nominated Annie Ubelis as the Supreme Court, we saw that letter. The only thing that needed to be filled in was the name. I mean, the accusations were all going to be the same, whether it was Curtis, me, or Annie. I mean, just send it off to the printer or to the public, fill in the name, and, they're a rapist or they're a racist. Or I mean, this is insanity. And, of course, there's that base of Democrats that are so stupid that they believe anything.
That's true.
And I think, the judges that are on President Trump's Supreme Court shortlist are aware of that now. I don't think they were before the Kavanaugh controversy unfolded, that they were going to be attacked in such a political way, because many of them aren't political animals themselves. That's one of the things that made Justice Kavanaugh different and made him attractive to the White House, was that he understood all of that, having been a former Supreme Court clerk, worked at big law in town, and been a judge in D.C. for over a decade. But he also had worked in the White House on judicial nominations. He worked on Roberts' nomination, so he would have had a better understanding of all of that. But he was also an enemy of the Clintons from the Lewinsky days, and now I think at this point in time, we're seeing that all these other judges are going to begin to take precautions so that when they do get to that point where they're under attack, they can perhaps fend it off better. And that was one of the things I tried to do in reporting out Search and Destroy, was see whether any of them had changed their minds. And what I found was all the judges that were on President Trump's shortlist, none of them removed themselves, said, I don't want to do this anymore after the Kavanaugh controversy, specifically because of it. Now, younger lawyers that are at the Justice Department working elsewhere that have an interest in public service, they are both publicly and privately more concerned about this thing, because they don't want to walk into a situation where they're going to be accused or their family's going to face scrutiny or any number of other things could happen simply because they want to serve their country.
Well, there is a fear of being pushed into the public eye that takes a personal toll. And what was different is that where Bork stepped back, we now have the term, you've been borked. We've seen where other judges have withdrawn their name. Kavanaugh had the strength and the temerity to say, I'm not stepping back. I'm in here for the fight. And when people see that and they see their life being thrown around the way that, Kavanaugh had his done and still is having done, people are hesitant. But what was different is that, this guy, Brian Fallon, said that they needed to build muscle memory so that, in the future, we're going to remember what they did to us, and just maybe we won't step forward and serve. That's their whole purpose, isn't it?
Yes. And I think it is. And I think that's really important, what you pointed out, because when he's saying that, what he's also saying is it's not just about beating down Brett Kavanaugh now. It's about learning how to do this for the future, so that whenever we do really have the opportunity to get someone, and whenever we can take punches and ruin someone's reputation, we remember how to do this, we learn how to do this, and we don't waste this opportunity to learn how to really go after someone in this way. And that's really remarkable that he would feel comfortable admitting it. But that was really one of the things that I found so interesting in reporting this book out, was just how many folks on the left felt comfortable explaining just the ways in which they did all of this. And I think one of the big reasons why was because of the way the Believe the Woman narrative took root and took hold in the middle of the Me Too moment and environment that we've seen unfolding in the last few years. With the Believe the Woman narrative being something that pressured Republicans to not ask adversarial questions, they turned over their questioning to Rachel Mitchell when they were facing Christine Blasey Ford. Christine Blasey Ford only ever faced sympathetic questions from Senate Democrats and from Rachel Mitchell because of that pressure to believe the woman. Michael Avenatti's accuser, Julie Swetnick, faced adversarial questions from a journalist alone without her lawyers. And that's one of the reasons why her allegations crumbled where Christine Blasey Ford's didn't right away. Because when that Believe the Woman narrative takes hold, that muscle memory that the left has created is able to flex its muscle in a way that it couldn't if responsible actors in the Senate and actual journalists did their jobs.
Now, I've got 12 pages of notes that I took, and this is computer typed. Because it's so interesting, because the attorney for the accuser, Michael Bromwich, actually stage managed how many reporters from what periodics were they allowed in, how many cameras, and how long, who's asking the questions. He stage managed the whole thing, and yet despite how well he tried to stage manage it, Trump administration put together a team of Don McGahn, John Kyle, Kerry Kopnick, Zena Bash. He put together a team that was that knew how to fight, knew what was needed to help protect Kavanaugh. So, Trump administration has to get a huge kudos for getting this nomination through.
But they did. And doing that too, I think they all learned the lessons of what Justice Thomas had to fight much more single-handedly. It was interesting to listen to White House counsel Don McGahn, former White House counsel now, talk about how, he came of age in the law and really got interested in the law as a result of the Bork fight, and then he was coming of age as a lawyer during Justice Thomas's fight, so he had some idea of what was going to happen. And then in the final preparation for Justice Kavanaugh ahead of the hearings, Mark Paoletta, who is a lawyer for Mike Pence, counsel to Vice President Mike Pence, and had worked with Justice Thomas in the past, really had kind of insisted to then Judge Kavanaugh to take the same approach Thomas did and don't go after the woman, but view the committee as your adversary, because the committee is the one doing the search and destroy process. And I think that's when we saw Judge Kavanaugh really say, you've replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. He was addressing the committee. And then he also sort of shouted out that Thomas line of, this has become a national disgrace. And I think the team that was built there by the Trump administration and by so many of those folks who knew Justice Kavanaugh was kind of a culmination of everything leading to this moment, where Republicans had been expectant that something would happen. I don't think they ever knew that it would be this, vitriolic and bad and nearly violent. But I think it was something where they'd been preparing for a long time because they could see where this was headed.
That they did. And the book is an excellent, excellent read. Search and Destroy Inside the Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh. Like I said, I got 12 tightly pages. But the thing, too, is that the left was eating their own, too, because you had some of the people that knew Kavanaugh that had, as attorneys and as professors, that came to his defense. And boy, were they bitten down.
That's right. Yeah, and particularly women lawyers. Most of the people that the left went after, especially among its own ranks, were women that were willing to stand up and say, I know this man. I may not share his particular approach to the law. I may not share his particular political views or the administrations that he's worked for, their views, and what he might do with regard to issues of abortion or other things. But I know him to be a good judge and the rest of it. And it was interesting the way in which women suffered more at the hands of the leftist activists than others did. And I think that's really all wrapped up in the abortion politics by their own admission. And I think it's something that was new and unique to this last time around. And I have to think also that it weighed on Justice Kavanaugh's mind, because we've seen since he's joined the court, he's the first justice to have an all-female clerk team in his first year. All of his clerks are women, and I think that was something that was a tacit acknowledgement of what women who were willing to stand by him and support him had gone through.
I love Justice Thomas. I really do. And he had a comment about it when he was addressing a dinner as a speaker, and he had his Spartacus moment. He had the temerity to call out Cory Booker, which, gained a good laugh. But these justices are being attacked. Even though they've been confirmed, they're still under attack.
They are. And Justice Thomas is really someone that's been under attack for the better part of 3 decades now. It's really interesting and remarkable here in Washington that the African American History Museum, when it opened, didn't have a dedicated component to the highest ranking at the time African American official in Washington after President Obama left office being Justice Thomas. And yet, when it did decide to mention him, it only mentioned him in the context of Anita Hill and the allegations surrounding his hearings, not his 25 years on the bench and the important opinions and rulings that he had had. And I think that's one of the reasons why, he in particular has taken the approach that he has to not ask questions at arguments and other things. But we've seen him now, too, sort of define some of his own narrative as others have tried to attack him, and there's going to be documentaries and things coming out there. And I think the justices on the right that have been appointed by Republican presidents are going to be more vocal. We've seen Justice Gorsuch has just written a book. Justice Thomas has been a little bit more vocal. And now next month, in October now, we're going to be seeing Justice Kavanaugh perhaps speaking for the first time at length at a Federalist Society event here in D.C. And I think it's part of an effort to kind of speak up and speak out in a way that Supreme Court justices just haven't done in the past.
Well, Ryan, it has been a pleasure having you on. It is a great book, and there's a link to it on the show page here. So when people listen in the archives, they just need to click on it, and they can go to Search and Destroy Inside the Campaign Against Brett Kavanaugh. Thank you for joining us, and people can also find you over at the Washington Examiner.
Thanks for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Ryan
Take care.
Lovelace.
Wow.
Check
What
out.
a great guest, Annie. Man, you just keep hitting grand slams. This guy was like better than the last guy I said was a grand slam.
Well, to follow that up, returning to our show, a retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, and I always mispronounce your name, so always forgive me, please. I got Sargis Sangari.
Yeah, you're on it, Ann. It's good.
All right, Colonel.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness. We had Robert Spencer on, so this is now part 2 of the Middle East and the attack. I got to ask you a question, because you know Middle East politics, and you recently came back from a conference over there in Israel. What the heck is going on with their government? You know, Netanyahu lost by 1 seat to gain the majority, and he can't seem to form a government. I do not understand Israeli politics.
Because a lot of Americans don't understand how parliamentary systems work. When the U.S. our forefathers overthrew the British government, one thing they decided was to completely change the form of government and not go with the parliamentary system. It is probably one of the worst forms of government you could work with. Unfortunately for the Israelis, they've not only adapted a form of the parliamentary system, they've also adapted a British-style parliamentary system, which has made it very difficult for them to be able to function. The problem Netanyahu runs into, and when I was in Israel, we were actually there to also monitor the Israeli elections, is that he's made a lot of internal enemies within his own Likud party. Besides the issues that he's dealing with the investigations, and a major investigation that still hasn't come through the pipeline is as far as sales of submarines to the Egyptians, without really having the national security apparatus structure being aware of what was happening through that process, has put him in a position where he just cannot formulate a coherent government together. Now, the president makes a call in that system as to who should go first to try to formulate the government. I think if Netanyahu had waited and allowed Gantz to go first, Gantz probably would have failed in that form of a government to be able to have a majority-capable, consolidated government to be formed moving forward. It would have given an opportunity for Netanyahu to probably survive the possible move towards a third election. But I think with him going first, if he cannot formulate a government, and it's possible that he will not be able to, either Likud would have to push far right with somebody else coming in and taking his position, or Netanyahu would completely be out of politics. And you'll probably take a look at a third election with Netanyahu not even being the lead for the Likud when it comes to the election process.
Well, you've got a prime minister in there. You also have a president. The president's name is Rivlin. He's been calling for them to get together to form this government. But I don't think Gantz, who's from the Blue and White Party, I don't think he's going to budge an inch. What's your impression?
Well, he can't, because for the first time in Israeli elections also, the unified party that has the Arabs within it, number of those Arabs came out and actually put their support towards a prime minister for Israel. That completely turns the entire process upside down, where you have the various different ethnical groups that are Jewish groups that have come from other places, from Europe, from Africa, other locations that are currently residing in Israel, completely flipping as to whether or not they're willing to support that party. So it changes the formula and the map. Our initial assessment, when we looked at this election that took place on the 17th September, was that it's possible that Likud would have to move to the far right, with possibly Gilad Erdan being maybe the next lead. And I think that neither the current Likud party, as Benjamin Netanyahu being the lead, and also the formulation of the various different parties that are currently supporting the opposition, are going to be able to formulate within the system that Israel has a cohesive government. Because you could literally have last-minute changes inside of those parties that actually collapses the party itself and doesn't allow for a consolidated government to move forward.
Well, as I was listening to the news and trying to understand what was going on, I understand there's now a large Arab component that never existed before in the government. Are they going to play sides against each other, or are they going to try to form a coalition? Where do you see them stepping into this?
No, and well, that's what I was referring to. They do have a coalition, and some of the members within that coalition, for the first time in the history of Israel, have actually stated that they are willing to support endorse a prime minister. Unfortunately, that doesn't bode well if you're the prime minister, possible future prime minister that they're endorsing, because in the example that I just gave you, the Jews that are from the former Soviet Union, we can refer to them as Russian Jews. That's not the technical term, but for us to better understand from an American perspective, as soon as they saw that happening, they said, we're not going to be, holding our votes in support of the whatever coalition government that the opposition party puts together. So there's a lot of internal fights that are taking place in Israel because of it. It is a very parliamentary systems are very volatile systems, and to really be able to hold them together, you have to be very skilled as far as being able to get votes, formulate coalitions, and moving forward. That's one of the reasons Benjamin Netanyahu has been so good, really, is about winning elections and holding coalitions together. Otherwise, as far as governance is concerned, that's a different issue. On the governance side, he has had multiple setbacks, and internal issues have also affected the economy of Israel. But at the end of the day, whether you're in the United States, living in Alabama, or you're in Israel, economy drives the train.
Well, you mentioned economy, and we've had the attack on the Saudi oil fields, which we're tracing back, I believe, to Iran. Excuse me. And we have a dynamic coming in here. The Saudis are saying, hey, listen, the best way to control Iran is to do it financially. You hear other calls for we're sending more troops over. What do you see going on with this situation over there?
Well, we actually talked about this in the Near East going back to 2015. And in 2015, we posted an article on the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement saying who speaks for Islam, who should speak for Islam. And this has been an internal fight between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam, and who's going to be the dominant when it comes to the global presence as far as being a speaker on behalf of Islam. And the Sunni states have across the board failed absolutely dramatically when it comes to trying to be that lead. If you think about it, majority of the historical and key religious institutions are actually within the borders of Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia in itself has never been able to project itself as being a key figure that can speak on behalf of Islam when it comes to what world politics would like. In the Christian faith, we have multiple different denominations, but there's one central figure that everybody kind of knows when he speaks on behalf of what the Judeo-Christian ideology is, and that's the Pope. The Pope has an opportunity to stand on stage at the UN. He has an opportunity to visit with world leaders, both Christian and non-Christian, and is able to somewhat project what we view as a possibility of what the Judeo-Christian ethics are. Islam doesn't have that figure. You can't name him. So because of that, this internal fight always takes place. And currently, Iran has shown his ability to be really the lead, because Iran was the first nation to go through a revolution, establish the Islamic Republic. Even all the Sunni states that came afterwards, with all the revolutions, internal turmoil with the Arab Spring, all of them geared towards trying to duplicate what Iran did within its borders, and they failed to do so. Majority of the Arab Spring nations ended up being in chaos, and that is really attributed to Saudi's inability to be able to have any influence over its own Sunni leadership when it comes from a religious, theological beliefs. Same thing with Turkey. Turkey has not been able to be that lead, that role, although they're a NATO partner, and they are very strong from what they sit geographically when it comes to their ties to the EU and the Middle East. So Iran has been able to, through this process, show its ability. Now, Iran does use terror, just like the Sunni states do, but Iran uses it for the survival of its regime and uses it to get the leverage in order to be able to negotiate with the West on issues that are more state-driven rather than theological-driven. However, from a Sunni side, anything that has come forward that has used terror, in this case ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iraq, has been specifically driven towards trying to bring an end of this world fight in order to establish a global Islamic Jihad. Iran doesn't believe that that's even possible. Is more practical when it comes to how it uses religious terror in this case in order to be able to get the polities of the world to come to the table in order to strike a nuclear/economic agreement with it.
Well, we're looking at the situation between Saudi Arabia and Iran needs something to coalesce their populace around, because we hear murmurings that the populace is getting restless, that there may be a potential for another civil revolt. So are the mullahs using this to say, hey, listen, we're being attacked. We need you to stand firm with us, with the Revolutionary Guard. Are they stirring up trouble just so that they can retain power over the people?
Somewhat they do. That's part of it. But the other part is that Iran has always seen itself as being a regime that is always being attacked. It doesn't see the world polities as being favorable to it. It feels always that it has to fight against all the world polities in order to be able to win its right. It's like that little guy on the playground that believes that I always have to fight the big dog in order to prove that it exists. In this case, world politics told them when they struck a deal with it that you don't have to do that for us to be able to work with you. The problem is Iran doesn't know how to answer the question of its revolution. For the past 40 years, it really never understood, why did we revolt? Why did we overthrow the previous regime, establish an Islamic republic, and what was the outcome? What were we supposed to achieve? Because technically, without even going through a revolution, they could have maybe gotten to this point. Unfortunately, that's an internal struggle that Iran has. The way Iran controls its populace is the hardliners allow for a moderate to be the president of Iran. This way, they're able to turn around and tell the moderates, look, you do have a voice. That voice is actually the leadership, the presidential leadership of the nation. it's elected through you guys. So that's the face of the Iranian regime when it comes to what it does externally, when it comes to dealing with the world politics. In this case, even when the Iran sat across the nations of the world in the Security Council and struck the nuclear deal, there was the moderates that were put into the lead. This is how the extremists, the hardliners in Iran, are able to pacify somewhat the Iranian populace when it comes to them wanting to see a change in government. Now, the hardliner runs the country, don't get me wrong, but at least it feeds the narrative to the people that we are allowing you to have a voice, to have a say. And because that moderate type of an individual exists in the government structure of Iran, it's able to at least control the people. But with the economic pressures taking place, with the younger generation of Iranians, it's becoming much more difficult for them to do so.
Oh, I don't think I'll live to see that overturned, but maybe one day. But we're throwing into the mix here the add in China. Because China is now making a move worldwide. They're in Africa, they're in South America, and they're in the Central America, they're in the Caribbean. They're everywhere, and now they're partnering, as I understand, with Iran.
Well, I mean, China has always been partnered with Iran. If it wasn't for China, under the sanctions, Iran would never be able to collect at least on the interest for its oil and money that was sitting in their banking systems, frozen, not being able to be shared because of the sanctions that were applied against it. So China has had a 100-year plan. They're way ahead of that 100-year plan. You can't blame China given the fact that if we had a nation that was not called United States, whatever you want to name it, and it had the population that China had, I guarantee you our citizenry would be asking for us to be a global dominance too. The problem China has is that inherently at its core, the regime in China that ended up taking the lead to execute this 100-year plan is a dictatorship. Within itself, it is own structures, be a non-capital type of a system, being a socialist system. Long time ago, the Chinese businessmen realized that, this structure may not prove beneficial as we take these larger steps to become a global dominance throughout the world. So, hence, Hong Kong pops up. The Chinese businessmen who were in the apparatus of the government of China realized, I can take a lot of the money and that exists currently, possibly the creation of wealth, and I can store it in countries that are capitalistic and can support my endeavors in the long run. So what ends up happening is you have a Chinese leader that is in charge of the manufacturing textile industry that is government owned. He's getting cheap slave labor at no cost, building things for him, and in this case could be the political prisoners. He exports that through Hong Kong, selling it to the Chinese government as a possibility of expansion of our economic footprint, establishes his relatives, in this case in the United States, who are going to manage that manufacturing textile capability that might be brought here for the U.S. consumer, ties it to American businesses and European businesses through Hong Kong, and takes literally China's wealth and launders it through Hong Kong into the United States. The problem China has, a lot of what it originally had as possible economic basis by which it was going to build the infrastructures internal to China, expand its capability, was literally wealth that was laundered out of China into various different global markets. China's still moving forward with this dominance of Southeast Asia and all other possible markets in the future has a problem. Its main historical wealth is built on a quicksand. That's why China ends up losing quickly in these type of tariff wars and these economic wars, because what it lost originally through these markets, and it looks at Hong Kong as a hub to move money rather than a state within a state, it ends up taking hits when we put tariffs against them, which are double to what the possible negative might be for the United States. China has to work with individuals like Iran. China has to work through the Shanghai Cooperation organizational capabilities to expand that footprint. The current POTUS has understood that, and he's taken steps that has tried to further bog down China economically by tying down their ability on sunk costs in other nations. As an example, because China goes into Pakistan, it goes in and literally buys majority of the political leadership in the Pakistan parliament through Chinese companies and Chinese development projects. When we decide we're going to put pressure on Pakistan by ensuring it has an unstable economy, how do we do it? We put sanctions on Iran. We told India, go ahead and develop the port of Charbagh for Iran, because we are going to remove that one port from the sanctions so that Iran can build a railhead into Afghanistan, so we can bypass the ability of having to work through Karachi, really collapsing the economy of Pakistan. What China has put in to manage those leaderships in Pakistan now becomes a sunk cost for them, because they only know how to operate from a socialist dictatorship ideology. They don't know how to use the free markets to give themselves an out when it comes to these political maturations and steps that are taken to expand their footprint, whether it be in Asia, Middle East, or other places. They're starting to learn a little bit how to maybe counter us. As an example, when we hit them in North Korea with a relationship, or Southeast Asia, or when we put sanctions on them that are affecting them, when it comes to their Belt and Road Initiative, they try to move into Syria, as an example, with the Syrian populations that were historically tied to them, to try to get their hands on $400 billion of reconstruction that might allow them to have a footprint in our backyard, in this case in Syria. So these are the type of global fights that are taking place with China. I think if we keep to what we are doing currently, China would have to go through an internal change of leadership, not a regime change, but change of leadership, to be able to allow us to better negotiate with them and hopefully stop them from this global dominance that they think they can achieve through sheer force, using their companies and their populations.
Well, now, throw into this mix now how much real estate they own here in the United States. How many ports do they actually own here? Other facilities that are I'm trying to think of the proper word, are major facilities here in the United States. I'm just wondering why they haven't pulled that card yet.
Well, I mean, they've done it. They don't need it. They're holding that for possible future conflicts. I'll give you as an example. When I told you when they started moving their family members, these are generational family members. These generational family members now become part of the fabric of the society that they live in. You have second and third generation Chinese that initially came here. Didn't come here because they wanted to immigrate here. They came here because it was part of the Chinese 100-year plan to get them here, to establish them here, to tie them to these governmental support companies, to be able to have them to where the linkages are historic with them. So when it comes to their politics, even though in this case they're American citizens, they tend to lean more towards China's goal as to what it wants to achieve whether it be with the United States or in the region. As an example, it was these type of historical communities that were the reason that in 2012, when the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave a speech at the Brookings Institute where he presented China's vision of future in an address he had titled New Power Relations, which we in the Near East wrote about, he looked at how China and the United States are clearly divergent, and the ideology of this divergency can be supported by trying to enable the two nations to avoid the type of friction that may spark a global conflict in the future. The majority of the individuals who pushed the previous administration to support that initiative, which we took hold of and started working towards until the current POTUS came in, were these individuals who were from those historical families that were tied in, that had a power base, monetary base, and had a say in American politics. The Puget Sound, where I used to be there at Fort Lewis, Washington, one of my tour assignments before I did my 20 years and retired, both sides of the Puget Sound, long time ago, China started developing the purchase of those pieces of property to include placing Chinese-owned businesses and Chinese-owned infrastructures there. Now, why is that important? China, in its 100-year plan, looked at the possibility if we ever get into a shooting war with the United States, going back years, now decades we're talking about. If I own the Puget Sound, what else do I own? Well, for the U.S., every piece of railhead that we have has to go through the Puget Sound still. So if there's a shooting war in Southeast Asia, that's the port and the position where we actually push all our stuff through the West Coast in order to drive into Southeast Asia or Asia for a conflict, military conflict. Well, the main choke point that you need to push everything through the Puget Sound is owned by China, because China a long time ago looked at it as a strategic choke point for possibility being able to have effects on U.S. policy, even when it comes to how it uses its force structures in areas of conflict. With today's technology, if I decide to push my special units through those ports, the Chinese would have advanced knowledge of who these people are, where they're going, and what type of operations they're doing. In Kuwait, as an example, when I was there as a director of Host Nation Affairs, China pushed with the Kuwaiti government, although the U.S. had a DCA with them, agreement, force-on-force agreement and support. China built a manufacturing base for ammunition factory for the Kuwaitis. And where did they put it? They put it right next to the two major golf balls, that we call them, because they look like golf balls, that are the strategic communication nodes, that everything that we discussed in our operations when we fought in Afghanistan and Iraq was fed through those nodes directly back to the States. So it gives it an opportunity to literally be from a stone's throw away from the strategic assets that the U.S. uses to manage its operations when it comes to CENTCOM within that entire area of operation. So this is how China has moved into territories, even in Israel that I just came back from. This is going to be the first possible year that the largest number of tourists to Israel are going to be Chinese tourists. Eventually, some of those tourists will settle in Israel. The port of Haifa currently is being developed by the Chinese. And then 2-3 generations from now, those individuals that settled there, came in initially as tourists, now become part of the fabric of that state, and they become part of the voting bloc in that fabric of that state, with still ties to China mainland and possibly still the Chinese ideology when it comes to what it wants to do over a long run on this 100-year plan.
It is scary. to know that our security is that flimsy at this point. Because when you look even to the point of immigration that you talk about and birthright citizenship, you had the maternity tourism going on, in which, we've been trying to stop. And it also puts an importance on birthright citizenship in cases like this, because now you have the women go home with these babies and they have dual citizenship, which means that they can't be denied entry back into the United States when that child is an adult.
Well, that was pushed by, when we're talking about these programs are not just some rinky-dinky operation that was being run. These are programs that were sponsored by government officials out of China. And a lot of these children are tied to Chinese families. Look, the Chinese leadership knows how to expand its footprint. Australia, which is a key figure for us when it comes to a territory that we need in order to be able to fight against this menace in the future, Chinese leadership has 5 family members that are staying within Australia itself. They're part of the fabric of the Australian government, and they do advise individuals within the Australian government. The same company, there's a holding company that when Near East, my company, we looked at what was happening with the Burma genocide that was tied to the genocide itself, which is a Chinese conglomerate, is the same one that was pulling iron ore out of Australia. China knows how to use its populace and how to use its companies to leverage itself for a strategic battle. We don't look at it sometimes that way, but China looks at it. We may not have as much influence on our companies, but China has direct influence given the fact that every single company within the structure of this type of a dictatorship will be beholden to what the government wants it to do as an advantage for its wants and desires. The reason why when I was in the military we decided not to use the sticks that you would put into your computers to download information anymore, because when China was selling those on the market, a lot of the ones that were targeted to be sold on U.S. military bases, even in the Walmarts close to the U.S. military bases, were the ones that were built with specific targeting requirements in them to be able to, if in case a military person bought it, to be used in the U.S. computers or military installations to steal data and information. So China knows how to move forward within this fight and is able to do it because it's much more controlled at the governmental level. But our benefit is the fact that because of how corrupt initially the Chinese leadership were decades ago, and how the systems they set up are more tied towards corruption rather than free market flow, it has given us the opportunity to really squeeze them, where they're not able to maybe develop new markets off of a different plan in order to be able to maybe counter what we do.
Annie, can you
I
ask
have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Curtis. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you think it's possible ever that the United States would allow China to gain military and technological superiority over us?
Well, we did that under the Clinton administration, because what we did was, prior to President Clinton sending all the technology over to China, China couldn't even do airfield seizures. That was a specific type of a mission requirement that only our Rangers were able to do. However, with us sharing that information with them, it gave them a technological edge and a operational edge that mirrored to an extent what we used to do. Now we're still the strongest military in the world, but take a look at the F-35. F-35 plans were hacked by the Chinese. As you take a look at the Chinese aircraft systems that came out of the after the F-35, they're pretty much the same plans and the same matrix blueprint that we use for our F-35. So China using cyber attacks capabilities, individuals are loyal to China, are able to gain at least an advantage on us. Now, the only one that I think still would be a nation that could give them a leverage would be Japan. But Japan and China being adversaries, Japan hasn't offered in any which way to develop possible Chinese future weapon systems in order to be able to, allow China to be as competitive on the global stage as the U.S., but two, at the same time, if we provide intel information to them or technology today, not when we did it under the Clinton, it is very much possible that the Chinese would think that any type of technology we offer the Chinese, we could always have a back door to it. That means we could really, from a cyber capability, ensure that if they ever try to use those weapons against us, that would not be able to operate the way that the Chinese soldier on the ground would like it to operate. So that's just a reality. This is a discussion that has to be done between various different administrations. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, maybe whoever becomes the POTUS, if they have a good relationship with the Chinese that is different than the current POTUS has, where he's pressuring them economically, that individual may decide to share that type of technology.
Well, Mike, before you jump in, I wanted to ask this because I read recently that the government is now starting to take a lot of their data and loading it up to the cloud, which would be run by Google and Amazon. That in itself had me worried. But now when you throw in the Chinese factor, should we be really concerned about how our government is handling the storage of its data?
Cyber war is really the next most complicated space that we have to fight these type of fights. U.S. systems, by law, to an extent, are not designed to be able to counter it. Like I said, the Chinese are able to steal the F-35 plans. Okay, that's one of the most sophisticated weapon systems we have. Lockheed Martin could not stop that from happening. Now imagine, the other infrastructure systems that the U.S. uses, having basically the information that, we assume to be secure, but possibly having breach points into them, given the fact that the companies that load this information, secure it, if they want to ever operate in China, would have to somewhat allow China to have at least a means and ways, if they want, for their national security requirements to either affect or, for a better term, and I'm walking a fine line here because there's a lot of things that I hope you can read between the lines. That's why I'm talking in generalities here. That allow them to maybe, if they want to have somebody for security measures, let's say, investigated, that data would be available to them. And it would be these companies that are now with agreements, memorandum of understanding agreement, available to offer that information to them.
And Google already has that. And that's the scary part.
Well, like I said, there's some things that you just have to read through the lines. I know I'm talking more generalities, but I think the listeners would understand exactly what we're referencing. Look, it's a reality. There's a competition between global capabilities. China wants to be the global lead, and it will do anything at its disposal to conduct genocide in Burma in order to be the lead. And it will use even Huawei to do that. So this is a type of a menace you're fighting against, and the only way you could stop it is that you got to go for the head of the snake. In this case, the head of the snake would be, or the dragon, let's say. In this case, we're talking about China, would be a change within the current leadership in China that will allow us to at least work with someone else within the Chinese government that understands you cannot just burn through every major society, every major continent at a whim. Look, we helped you become the second largest economy in the world. If I was advising the Chinese, this is how I would tell them. Your job is, you want to be the second largest economy in the world, then you need to share the burden of developing the nations around you, especially in Southeast Asia. Not just for your benefit, though, for the benefit of those nations. That means the costs that you have to be used for development, for positive, for world economy, not for development, for the positive, for your footprint expansion. And if China figures that out, I think the U.S. will be willing to work with it without having to go to these extreme measures.
Annie, you were talking about your concerns about our security, information up in the clouds being secure, but I'm concerned about the fact that there was a Chinese national who was able to breach security down at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, and I think she was carrying like cell phones, passports, and computer drives and malware. How does that happen?
Well, it happens because people get trained to do cyber operations and collect data, and there's a big market for that information. Look, and the other piece that China is pushing, I would even recommend you look at what is happening with as an example, with the Bitcoins. With Facebook trying to develop its own digital currency. These digital currencies, we have a hard time tracking them to see how they're being used, where they're being used. New regulations are being pushed out there, but the reason the digital currency was used and expanded by state actors was because it's a great way to destroy economies of nations. Currently, the U.S. dollar is still the reserve currency of the world. Digital currency was created by state nation supports. It wasn't initially created for this requirement, but states picked up on it and started expanding it with other currencies that they introduced into the market and push for in order, one, to be able to move money, two, launder money, three, be able to hide money, because, the regulations became much more difficult as far as how you could hide and move money, especially with the 314 A's and B's and the Patriot Act. It was in a way to pressure the Federal Reserve to undercut it. If the Federal Reserve does not have the capability of controlling U.S. currency and supporting it to be the reserve currency of the world, in this case, the last resort that we have in the U.S. right now is for the current POTUS to devalue the dollar to allow us to be more competitive on the global market and squeeze China more with these tariffs. Then the digital currency was created to completely undermine state control of currency. With that said, that means in a heartbeat, if tomorrow this digital currency becomes the viable currency that somebody uses, U.S. dollar no longer is a reserve currency for world markets. What ends up happening? Your economy is gone in a heartbeat. You don't have to worry about a stock market crash or anything else. Your money basically becomes no value because the digital currency has replaced it. It's no longer in control of Federal Reserve. The digital currency is now controlled by few individuals, companies, and families on the global market. A lot of those individuals are also tied to Chinese efforts. against the U.S. to try to not just slow but possibly break and affect U.S. economy over the next 2 decades.
I was curious as to why a lot of these bitcoins were coming out, not just from the United States, but had founders that were based in the Middle East and in Russia. Well, you just gave me a whole new look on the economy.
Correct. The Middle East is, there's a lot of these owners that are in the Middle East, but behind them, if you unpeel that onion, there's a Chinese fellow standing behind them, tied to the Chinese government.
Man, if we're not careful, we do not get a president elected in 2020 that will defend us like Trump is, we're going to be a little big pile of you know what, and it's starting to stink bad.
U.S. is not just behind the power curve; the power curve has passed by it. U.S. is structurally unprepared to fight this fight. We've been lucky, with God's blessings. We've been lucky to survive during these 100 years that China has taken these steps forward. I think that it is very possible that in the 21st century we could really squeeze China, especially with the tariffs. I know the stock of pork has gone up, skyrocketed in China. The middle and business class of China values how much money you're making as a middle class businessman by how much pork you consume that day. And I know it's hurting our industries here as we're starting to slowly develop other possible markets in Southeast Asia. But my recommendation is if we continue down this path, we squeeze China. Hopefully, Congress, both the House and the Senate, work hard in support of Trump's vision against China. We can at least reverse some of the losses that we've had in this 100-year march towards whoever is going to be the victor. We got to tie China to a point that it realizes that it's literally the weight of the shoulder on its back. I should say the weight of the world on its shoulders when it comes to how it's tied down, bogged down in Pakistan and Middle East and Africa and in South America, and even currently as it's trying to strike deals with Europe. When we're able to do that to it, everything that is done to us over the past 100 years could be reversed given current technologies. It's just that it takes a strong, unified government in the U.S. from the executive to the legislative branch with some slight changes to how U.S. code operates internally, approvals with the judiciary for us to really be able to, stop the bleeding that been causing us the pain we've been suffering all this time economically.
Well, do you see at some point in the future where there will be a direct conflict between the world of Islam and China as they both march towards world dominance?
It would be beneficial to us if that happens. The more destabilized Islamic nations are around China, the less opportunity China has to initiate its pressures against us, especially the Belt and Road Initiative. So, if I remember, India is the second largest Muslim nation in the world. People don't know that. There's a lot of Muslims that live in India too. And India is a major buffer against us when it comes to China. I think China having to deal with Islamic issues, not just within its borders, but within other nations, to include Afghanistan, to include all the stands, the Southern Caucasus, having issues with unrest in Mongolia, having to deal with the issues of Hong Kong and the unrest it's dealing with in Hong Kong. China will eventually have to go into Hong Kong. It's a no-win game for it to be where it is currently. It has no choice. It did this to itself, so it has to go into Hong Kong sooner than later. With the problems that it has to deal with when it comes to Singapore and all other nations that it needs to develop those ports for, to be able to tactically bypass our supremacy in the waters when it comes to Southeast Asia with what it's trying to do in Burma. I think the more destabilized those areas are, the more enemies China has, and how it treats its Islamic Muslim populace is more beneficial to us.
Wow, there's a lot to think about on this one. Holy cow. It means that Trump has been right about China all along. And those that are on the left that are fighting him on it are aiding China in their total world domination. And I didn't realize how far and how bad we've gotten it to this point. And I don't think anyone else is really paying much attention.
No, it's bad. Well, it's bad, but everybody else is too worried about winning the next election. They're not really thinking about the long-term strategies of what we need to do in order to be able to support our ability to win. Look, I'll give you as an example, and if I'm going off tangent, please stop me so we can come back to the main point. But Congress is a 2-year Congress, okay? That's all it is. November 5th of last year, a new congressman came into the Congress. They won, they came in. Remember, the government wasn't even open till February. So if you had just won as a new congressperson coming in, you weren't even sworn in, you weren't sitting behind your desk, and you weren't doing anything as far as legislative work until February once the government was opened up again. Well, January 10th of this year, me being a Republican, had a meeting with other Republicans in Illinois, and we were coming up with possible strategies of how to be able to get the next group of people into Congress in Illinois from the Republican side for the 2020 election. By April, the people who were initially wanting to run could have filed their collected money and filed for their first quarter reporting. You are a congressman. You just went ahead and won 5 November. You haven't even sat in your seat by February, and there's a person who's already raised money because the opposition party has collected money, supported them in the filing April, a month before you even, a month after you have sat in your seat. So now what happens with these congressmen, congresspeople, they go to what is called a farm. When they get to the farm, both Republicans and Democrats, the leadership comes and says, here's the bills we're concerned about, and here's how we're going to move forward in order to go in the 2020 election. So you will be co-signer on this bill, you will be the signer on this bill, we're going to put you on this committee, we'll put you on this committee. Now, you may say, no, I don't want to do that, then your leadership will bury you. So you're stuck. You came in, there's a person already raised money, filed in April to try to beat you in the 2020 election. You haven't even sat yet until February of 2019, and you already have your leadership telling you you're going to be handcuffed. That's what you're going to do. Now, the congressional calendar split in 2 halves with the August recess. So whatever you decide to do on behalf of your constituents, you have to do before the August recess. Why? Because whatever money might be authorized in the first half of the congressional calendar, because of how our budget works, may not be allocated in the second half of the calendar. So you may have a program that you were able to pass through the system to be able to get on the congressional calendar to be voted on, but you may not have money for that program that just got voted off. Now, the person who had already filed money to try to beat you in the 2020 election had put money in the April coffers. 3 months later, has a second quarterly filing. September 3rd of this year, we started collecting signatures in order to be able to run against whoever that we want to run against in the Illinois politics in March when the primaries take hold. You're a person who just walked in. Others have already raised money against you. You're stuck in this fight because the leadership says you're going to fight on these issues, whether it be impeachment or something else that they're going down the route on. You're literally not able to get anything passed. And September 3rd, you have to be out on the streets collecting signatures to file in November to run in a primary in March. And you may even have your own party running against you in the primary, and then you're going to be focused on trying to run and win the election for November 2020. While this is all happening, China is working on its 100-year plan. This is why you can't get anything done.
And if anyone remembers, when Hillary Clinton ran for Senate in New York, there was a huge scandal about Chinese money that went into her campaign. That was never followed up on.
No, and China and Russia, they all know this. They know how our systems work. They know they cannot defeat us on the battlefield. But they do know that they could, have effects on us within our internal politics, especially depending on how the politics have divided us. I'll give you an example. The shooting that took place in New Zealand, with New Zealand making the decision that we're going to take all the weapon systems, major assault weapon systems, away from our people. Now, if I'm looking from a strategic standpoint, and I say one day I'm going to get in a shooting war with China, the best way to fight China would be to take divisions of the Chinese and bog them down in a traditional battle, since that battlefield will change in the future, if not has already changed with drones and other capabilities, to bog them down into having to be somewhere footprint on the ground in New Zealand. Well, if I've already removed the weapon systems off the battlefield in New Zealand, I've just helped the Chinese to have a lesser need to concentrate on that particular battlefield, because New Zealand has decided they're going to disarm themselves internally. The young man who went in and conducted the mock shooting prior to going to New Zealand and, killing those innocent people in the mosques had gone on a trip to North Korea. Chinese officials had seen him in North Korea. This is not a conspiracy theory issue. What I'm saying is, in the photos that is on open source of him being there, it was an indication that Chinese government, understanding social media, understanding what we call lone wolf attackers, understanding who is who, is able to use any means at its disposal, any possible cracks that it can, to flip the screen for its advantage. So, is it possible that it could use things that are controversial to us internally within our system when it comes to our social values, where we fall on the line, to be able to drive a narrative to affect our long-term policies for their strategic advantage? Of course it is. Of course it is. In this case, they are able to use whatever capacity that they have and whatever opportunity they have in order to be able to alleviate the pressures on themselves to set the battlefield, that in the future, if that ever happens, they'll be able to be victorious in a short period of time.
Oh, there's so much for our listeners to contemplate, but people can find you on your website, which is the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, by going to nec-se.com. There's so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but we're running short on time here, because you also have near and dear to your heart the Assyrian Christian issue, and that people can learn about also by going to your website and listen and learn about the Assyrian families and the military members that do need help from us, because this is an ongoing battle, and we're going to be looking at, they're going to attempt to put 5,000 American Muslims up for election in the office this coming election, and we've got a battlefront on all areas. It's not just one-sided, it's a gazillion-sided.
Look, our systems are our systems, and what we try to do in the Near East is to show link analysis. What I know, others know. The problem is I can talk about it because I'm not in a system. Others may not be able to talk about it. I have to be very careful about what I say and how I speak also. But our foreign policy can be effective. We are a capable nation. We just got to focus. And right now we're all over the place. And if we focus more about burying the hatches in our enemies' heads rather than each other's, I think we'll come out on top in this fight. Because remember, at the end of the day, China built its entire strategic plan on quicksand, and we just got to expose it and take it apart slowly.
Well, God bless for the hard work you do, sir.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity and time, and I hope what I discussed helps.
Oh, it does. It does.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Check it out, the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, NEC-SE.com. And we've got our next victim up in the bullpen. Returning to the show, he is also, you can find him at the Insider Reports, C.S. Walker. Good afternoon, C.S. How are you today?
I'm doing good, Eddie. How are you?
All right. You have been following this Biden and Ukraine situation, and you seem to know it inside and out. You've done some shows on it people can find at the Insider Reports. And it's really hitting the fan big time. What is the latest? What is going on now?
Well, you know, a part of being an analyst is taking certain pieces of the puzzle, putting together to get the big picture. Now, the problem is, though, that the pieces of the puzzle 10 out of 10 times are not in the same spot. You have to go looking in different areas. Now, I know the last time I spoke with you, I explained to you that it was mostly, this was a big hit coming from the Warren camp. I was partly right, because as I kept studying and kept looking deeper into this, and I told you I was going to keep digging and digging and digging, all of a sudden, sometimes the pieces are right in front of you, and you don't see them. Now, let's refer to the situation with the transcripts from the phone call. Now, the transcripts, according to the Ukrainian president, he turns around and he says that, oh, yeah, well, don't worry, I'm going to get a prosecutor that I trust and a very trusted person. It's my person. And we're going to look into, you know, certain things. And we're going to look into, now, before that happened, the president asked him about CrowdStrike. Okay, I want you to look into this, and I want you to tell me what's going on with that, because according to supposedly you have one of the servers from CrowdStrike there in the Ukraine. Now, the president turns around from the Ukraine and turns around and tells, oh, yeah, we're going to look into that. My person will be in office, and we'll start looking into that in September. Annie, what month are we in? We're in September.
Mm-hmm.
I find it odd that all of a sudden this huge smoke screen gets thrown up about the president colluding with the Ukrainians now. Mind you, the same country that helped Hillary Clinton, the same country that helped and, in fact, even meddled in our election by bringing up the entire thing about Paul Manafort. Now, all of a sudden, now the Ukrainians are meddling. They weren't meddling before, but now they're meddling. I find that completely odd. Not to mention that he says, this is my person. We're going to look into it in September. All of a sudden, the Democrats just lose their ever-loving minds in September. And now they're talking about impeachment in September. So this is telling me there's two aspects to this whole thing. Because mind you, whenever you try to go on after something, you try to create more than one objective. Because that way, the more objectives within there, there's a good chance that you might hit one or two. If you put in 5 objectives, you might hit 1 or 2. So the objective, part A, is get rid of Joe Biden because A, he's not socialist enough. B, he's embarrassing. C, his mouth is his own worst enemy. D, he's male. He's an old white man. See, the Democrats want to turn around and actually create some kind of historical event. Historically, yes, Barack Obama, like him, hate him, whatever. He was the first African-American president in the United States. And that can be accredited to the Democratic Party, the same way that the first African-American politicians to ever sit in Washington, D.C. were Republicans right after the Civil War. So now the Democrats want more. They want not just control, but history. So they want the first female president. And Joe Biden's in the way. He wasn't in the way before. But now they're seeing Elizabeth Warren gaining momentum. They see Elizabeth Warren surpassing him in some polls. But the big objective with the DNC is CrowdStrike. They don't want that information released. The DNC know that the Russians did not hack their server. Now, why in the Ukraine? Because CrowdStrike turned around and did analysis of the Ukrainian server. There were computer systems in the Ukraine that the CrowdStrike went in there without Ukrainian approval and decided to do some investigating in some servers. And guess what? The Ukrainians turned around and seized CrowdStrike.
No,
they
exactly.
gathered information. They collected information.
What is CrowdStrike?
Go ahead.
What is the CrowdStrike?
CrowdStrike is this company in California, go figure, that they turn around and in the event, they basically set up your cybersecurity system for your servers. And if anything happens, they go in there and they do investigate. They do cyber forensics. And they break down what happened, how they get in, what did they take, if they took anything at all, did they embed anything. If you have a virus, they go in there and remove it. They try to save your server. So, and what I find funny is that the Senate representatives for the area, Sunnyvale, California, that CrowdStrike is in, Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein. Two of the heavy hitters in the Democratic Party. I find that odd. But okay, let's just call that a coincidence. Let's call that a funny coincidence. The entire thing has everything to do with CrowdStrike. They're trying to get ahead of this whole situation that would embarrass them. Now here, the president in the phone call, the Ukrainian president, says, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot. And Ukraine knows a lot about it because they were basically in the middle of it all. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. In other words, referring to some of the people that helped bring down Paul Manafort and meddle in the presidential election of 2016. Now, President Zelensky later on says, yes, it's important for me, blah, blah, blah. We be friends, yeah. It's like, the courtship of Eddie's father. Hey, who's my best friend? Okay, whatever. But now, here's where President Zelensky later on says, I wanted to tell you about the prosecutor. First of all, I understand and I'm knowledgeable about the situation. In other words, the prosecutor that Joe Biden had fired. Now, first of all, I understand and I'm knowledgeable since we have won the absolute majority in our parliament, the next prosecutor general will be 100% my person, my candidate, who will be approved by the parliament and will start as a new prosecutor in September. He or she will look into the situation specifically to the company that you mentioned in this issue. Now, which company? Was the company the one who Hunter Biden worked for, or is it CrowdStrike? Nobody knows, but people are assuming. So to cover my bases, I'm assuming both. Even though he said the company as in singular, you have to take into consideration you don't know which company he was referring to. Now, later on, the issue of the investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore honesty, so we will take care of that and we'll work on the investigation of the case. Now, as the Democrats are running around screaming and yelling, oh my God, collusion, 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 yet again, they're forgetting one thing. Way back when, the United States and the Ukraine signed an agreement. It wasn't a trade agreement, but it was an agreement on justice. And that agreement basically says that if you have somebody in your country that's committing corruption and we have information, we're going to pass it on to you. That's all the president asked, to maintain that treaty. That's it.
Now,
nothing more.
Does this
now while the Democrats
mean that is why Giuliani is being sent over there?
That's exactly why. Notice, not only was Giuliani the former mayor of New York City, but he was also a district attorney. He was a prosecutor.
Yeah, District 1.
See where that's going?
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, here's the funny part. You were NYPD, correct?
Correct.
And you know something about the law. And the law states that hearsay evidence is inadmissible evidence in a court of law. Inadmissible evidence basically in any situation, because it's hearsay. So this is where the Democrats messed up. Now here's my personal analysis. Since this one, and I call it fake whistleblower, because it's all hearsay evidence. There's nothing to substantiate what this individual has said. Since this fake whistleblower said, oh, I got it from other people. Oh, okay. Well, since we're not divulging your name, then by law, you have to give us the names of the people that actually gave you this information, because they're not protected under the Whistleblower Act. They're not protected because they didn't step up with this information and follow the whistleblower protocol. You did, supposedly. So with that being said, you have to give us their names, and we have to speak to them because they're the ones with the evidence. True or false?
Yes. Now, the only other thing is the complaint was not lodged against a fellow member of the intelligence community. The president is not a member of that community. So you really cannot file a complaint against him.
You're absolutely right. But if we decide, let's just for the sake of justice, let us follow the whistleblower protocol, okay, then you have to cough up the names of the people that told you all these things. Because you are the whistleblower. You are being protected. You are not, your name will not be released. You will not be shown to the entire planet that you are the whistleblower. But your informants will be. So now we can get to the root of the matter. Bypass the whistleblower, go to the snakes in the grass, find out exactly what they said. Did you tell him or her this, this, and this? Did you tell them this? Yes or no? Now, Joe Biden, and what I find funny is that the whistleblower's complaint, everybody's talking about how it was perfect. It looked like it was written by a law professor. Keep that in mind, law professor. And that this whistleblower complaint had footnotes and everything else. Annie, there's only one person I know of that would gain a great deal by submitting this complaint. One person who believes stands a chance of being the first female president of the United States. This one person who happens to also be a law professor, and that would be Elizabeth Warren. Now, am I saying she did it? No. Am I getting the feeling that somebody in her camp, in her campaign, was heavily involved in this? Oh yes, eyeball deep, heavily involved. May not have been her. The same way the entire birther movement occurred from the Clinton campaign way back in the day when they first ran up against Barack Obama. It wasn't Hillary Clinton that said that Barack Obama was not born in the United States, but somebody inside her camp did that. So now Hillary gets away with it, but that person was from her camp. So the Clinton campaign started the entire thing on the birther movement. Same thing, I believe, is happening here in the Warren camp, because history has a funny way of repeating itself. And people have a funny tendency of repeating stupid things that have happened in history.
CS.
Yes, sir.
Hey, this is CS. I was listening to Rush earlier today, and I want to know if you agree with his summation of this. He seems to think that the sudden rush to impeach Trump is somehow related to the fact that Trump, Barr, and a couple of other people in the Justice Department are getting close to the truth of what's, behind a lot of the stuff that's going on in Washington. So they want to run interference with Trump and get him out before they get, to the point where they can start naming names. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with him, because that's the thing with the CrowdStrike. Like I said, CrowdStrike is this cyber company. They're the ones that went in and examined the DNC server. They're the ones that say, oh, yes, you were hacked by the Russians. Well, how do you know we were hacked by the Russians? Because we found the Cyrillic alphabet. We found programs typed in Cyrillic in your computer system. There's one little problem, though. The country of the Ukraine also uses the Cyrillic alphabet. Funny coincidence. But to me, it's a simple case that no, nobody hacked that system. And CrowdStrike turned around, and when the FBI told CrowdStrike, okay, tell us your findings. Oh, no, we already gave the DNC the findings. Oh, okay, well, give us the server. Oh, no, we can't give you the server. Why not? Because it's not ours. And by the way, we give it back to the DNC. Okay, well, hey, DNC, give us the report. Okay, here's the report. And we also need the server. You can't have the server. Why? Because we already cleaned it. It's been wiped clean. All the viruses, anything and everything has been removed. Oh, okay. CS, that's like somebody breaking into your house, steals everything out of your house. You call the police show up, and they say, okay, well, we would like to go in and start the investigation. No need. I hired a private detective, and he's doing everything. No, but we'd like to go in and at least assist. No, you can't. That makes absolutely zero sense. If a crime has been committed, such as hacking into the DNC server, you want the federal authorities in there finding out what the hell happened, what was taken, what was tampered with, so that way later on down the road, you have a leg to stand on. They cut their own feet from underneath them, but yet people continue to believe that the Russians hacked the DNC server. And there's other circumstances to prove that nobody from another country hacked their system. So this whole thing is basically Elizabeth Warren is getting a boost by taking down Joe Biden, because right now, here's a woman, an supposedly intelligent woman, who wasn't smart enough to admit, no, I'm not Native American. But here we have this woman running for president. And what's standing in her way? 2 old white guys. 2 grumpy old white guys. And they both have bad hair. So, of course, this is an attempt to help Elizabeth Warren, but it's also an attempt to stop the search into CrowdStrike. That's all this is.
Oh, yeah.
So if they accomplish one over the other, it's still a win for the Democrats. It's still a win. But the problem is, though, that they forgot about they didn't research and they didn't look into the fact that there is a treaty between the Ukraine and the United States to share information on possible conspiracy or possible fraudulent acts conducted. They didn't know this. And this is going to blow up in their faces hard.
Now,
does Trump know this?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Does Trump know this? Does Trump know this?
He better damn well know it, because if he doesn't, give me the phone number. I'll let him, hey, yo, Mr. President, with all due respect, your people need to get their heads out their butts, because I got news for you. You had every right to do that. Not to mention, when it comes to Joe Biden, there is no digging. There's no digging needed. He openly admitted that he intimidated and threatened to withhold aid to the Ukrainians, which is against the law because it was to benefit his son. Now, here's one thing that people keep forgetting to take a look at. Joe Biden was the vice President of the United States. Joe Biden has zero authority to turn around and withhold aid that was already granted to that country. Either Congress or the president have that right, not Joe Biden, the vice president. So in order for Joe Biden to have some weight behind that threat, like when he told him, and if you don't believe me, call the United States, somebody else knew. And that other somebody was the person that gave him the approval and the support to say, yeah, do it, I got your back. And that would be the President of the United States. So now the President of the United States is also implicated in blackmailing the Ukrainian government.
Well, do you think anything will come out of this when they do the, quote, impeachment investigation to bite them fully? Do you think they're going to be able to uncover this and then answer to it?
If they can get the information on CrowdStrike. Now, as you can see, President Trump is already fighting back. He's bringing up the entire Biden thing. He's fighting back. If the Ukrainians can actually step up and do this collection of information and send it to the United States on CrowdStrike, yes. Now, to many people, some of your listeners, I'm pretty sure that they're saying, well, all this sounds like conspiracy theory. No. Joe Biden hopping on a flying saucer after threatening the Ukrainian government and landing in the United States in Washington, D.C. in 5 minutes because his flying saucer traveled at light speed, that's a conspiracy theory. Okay? And it's a crazy one at that. But all of this is not beyond the realm of possibility because of one simple fact. It's all happened in the past. All these things have already happened before. We all know that the Russians really didn't hack into the DNC. We all know that CrowdStrike went in there and took a look at the DNC server. All of that is fact. There's no conspiracy behind that. So if you stay within the realm of possibility, well, it's not so far-fetched, and it's not conspiratorial whatsoever. I mean, believe me, I've called up several people. I'm like, dude, do I sound like a nutcase saying this? And every one of them are like, no, because stuff like this happened in the past. I'm like, okay, thank you. Now, when they turn around and they complain that, well, why did it take the phone call and lock it up in a server that needs a password that's never been used before? Well, maybe because the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, got tired after his phone call with the President of Mexico and his phone call with the Prime Minister of Australia was leaked out to the press by a leaker, and they said that they were going to take measures in order to secure this information so this never happens again. Oh, by the way, we have a server with a password already on it. Okay, put it there. So none of this is beyond the realm of possibility, and none of it is what you might call fabricated or a dream. Because sometimes when I listen to myself, I'm like, I have to call some of my buddies, and they're like, no, dude, you sound like you're right on track. I mean, you tell me, Annie. You tell me, CS.
Well, I wouldn't put it...
You're right on.
I would say you're right on. Absolutely. But CS, people can find you at the Insider Reports and know that we put a link on the show page that goes directly to your website for your radio show. And people can check it out over there. But we're at the end of our show.
Can I ask a question, Annie?
Mike, we've got like 6 minutes left, so if it takes up only 2 seconds, fine, because we're at our max hour.
It'll take out less than that. Question for the guest. Do you think, as we speak, indictments from Barr and his staff, which are total Trumpers, are taking place, and one day we'll wake up and find out that overnight an awful lot of people are in handcuffs and the libs will really be flipping out? Yes or no? Thanks, Annie.
No, honestly, I'm sorry, no. I mean, everybody's talking about, there's, you have people on television going, tick-tock, tick-tock, the libs are going to pay, the Democrats are going to pay. Nobody's going to be arrested. Nobody's going to be arrested. I mean, let's take a look at Nixon. Nixon, he turned around, and he supposedly was impeached, and what he did was a crime. Did he go to prison? No. I mean, Nobody, and I'm sorry to tell you this, America, nobody's going to go to prison. Not a single solitary person.
Well, CS.
Sorry to break your heart.
CS, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the 911 on this one. But that's all the show we got for today. We will be back next Friday, and I will be putting the guests up. I think some of them are already up on my episode page, so just check out for the future. Great information, CS, and thank you so much.
Not a problem, Manny. Take care, CS. Both of you have a great weekend.
All right, we got to get back on.
All right, and Cool Mike, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us also. But we're going to close out the show with My Name is America by Todd Allen Herrington. So I say until then, good night and God bless. If I can hit the right key, get this going.
In the grip of oppression, I fought for my liberty. I paid with the blood of my people. Freedom has never been free. Now my door's always open to dreamers and friends. When I'm attacked, protect and defend, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. Taken from others gave it to me. They believe in the virtues I stand for, my respect for humanity. Now I'm challenged by tyrants who envy my power, but their vicious deeds become my finest hour, because my name is America. I stand proud and free. My name is America. Don't tread on me. I cannot be broken. I cannot be shamed. If you hurt me, I'll get stronger, and I'll rise up from the flames, and I'll always stand proud and free. I'm America, don't tread on me. America is my name. For those who need me, I'll always be here. For those who will harm me, I'll face without fear. But I'll always stand proud and free.
90 seconds.
I'm America, don't tread on me. I'm America, yes, America is my name. Is my
name. 60 seconds.